Good morning, dear colleagues, academics across the country, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to the second day of this conference on Nigeria's foreign policy, looking back, going forward, setting the agenda for Nigeria's foreign policy. We had a very robust presentation yesterday, and we guess that same thing will follow through today. While we would want to go straight into the presentation, from where we stopped yesterday, we want to plead with all presenters that the time allotted per paper is 15 minutes, and we want to plead with you to stick to 15 minutes so that we can conclude this in good time. So without much ado, I'll go straight to call on the first presenter for today. The first presenter is Professor Kamilu Fagi. His paper is on Nigerian foreign policy and insecurity in the Sahel. If you are with us, Professor Fagi, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Okay.
If this Professor Fagi with us, I guess he's not with us yet. While we're expecting, okay, Professor Fagi has just joined us, he's waiting to enter. So, Professor Fagi, if you're with us, please, you are making the first presentation this morning. While we are waiting for Professor Fagi to start his paper, we want to acknowledge the presence of Professor Femi Otubanjo and Professor Victor Adetula. Professor Otubanjo is of the University of Ibadan, while Professor Adetula is of the University of Jos. So you're both welcome, sir. Professor Fagi, if you are with us, if you are ready, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Will you unmute or just pass an instruction? Okay.
Professor Fagi.
Don't so that we'll call you.
distinguished colleagues, I guess Professor Fagli is having network issues. So we would likely move ahead, call on Dr. Godwin Ichimi to make his presentation. Dr. Ichimi, if you are ready, please, you have the floor. Godwin Ichimi, Dr. Godwin Ichimi, if you're ready, you have the floor. Thank you.
Hello?
Hello, sir.
Hello? Yeah, can you hear me? I'm working on it first. Hello?
It's not network is. Oh yeah, Ichimi now. Ichimi is there. Yes. Ichimi is there. Ichimi is there. Prof, can you unmute yourself?
Me?
We haven't really time. Since Professor Fagli is still having network issues, we should move on to the next presenter.
I am having.
Professor Fagli once the next presenter is done. So, Dr. Ichimi, if you are ready, you have the floor, please. Ichimi, if you're ready.
Yeah.
Dr. Ichimi, you have the floor. If you are ready.
Unmute.
Or you have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I stand on the established protocol? I have been asked to present on the paper Nigeria and post-Brexit UK. I want to appreciate the organizers for inviting me, and to begin my paper by saying that the developments surrounding the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union arrangement need not detain us here, because I believe that we are all at least basically familiar with the details. So because of the shortage of time, I will just concentrate on some of the main issues that I think should inform Nigeria's concern with post-Brexit UK. My paper, as most documents with interest on the United Kingdom's international relations, is premised on the recognition of the United Kingdom of sub-Saharan Africa in general as a major player on the global stage. Sub-Saharan Africa is seen as a continent which presents enormous economic and social opportunities as well as challenges. Based on expert advisory, as well as privileged information to policymakers and the conditions in Africa, policymakers are often compelled to take stronger sub-Saharan Africa, the respective component states, and of course, the African Union, particularly against the backdrop of the long-term strategy of Agenda 2063. So against this backdrop, we have had vast policies and strategies that have been formulated and targeted against the continent. I will single out the government of Theresa May as an example. Her government touted the notion of a new partnership with Africa based on a fundamental strategic shift. She proposed a new strategic focus, which will revolve around Africa's concerns with prosperity, security, and stability, climate change, and sustainable natural resource management, demographic transitions, and of course, the conditions in the Sahel. In furtherance of these concerns, the strategy canvassed for stronger economic partnership and investments on the continent, while supporting the capacity of Africa to manage her crisis. In addition to capacity building and resilience, the UK is also interested in issues that surround economic growth and development of the continent, along with education, healthcare, family planning, gender equality, empowerment, particularly of women and the girl child, and labor matters. These are the broad confluences of issues that the strategy proposed by the government of Theresa May highlights as her concerns and interests in Africa. The point remains, however, that the development across Europe and the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union arrangement throws up some very critical issues. The departure of the United Kingdom from that arrangement calls for a review of its foreign defense policy and security, as well as international development strategies and programs. It will be recalled that some people have argued that the UK's decision to abandon her formal relationships with the EU is a product of a targeted revision of her investment strategy in different parts of the world, Africa inclusive. So this throws up the question for us. In a post-Brexit era, is there a scope to establish a relationship on a slightly different footing, one that is more engaging and responsive to Nigeria and the United Kingdom? In trying to identify and address the salient issues underpinning this question, this paper tries to look at the issues of peace and security, migration, economic development, and political stability as being the major issues that will drive Nigeria-UK strategic concerns in the post-Brexit era. I will deal with these issues in a rather haphazard manner because of the interconnectedness of the issues. The UK is said to be committed to boosting trade, for example, if we are looking at the economic angle, which at the moment, if we look at the global strategy, her global strategy targeting Africa, UK trade with Africa stands at less than 3% of global trade with Africa. Of course, one could also point out that even Africans themselves trade very minimally with one another, the figure being 15% of their total trade. In the area of investment, it is said that the curve is actually flattening out. Between 2008 and 2018, a whole decade, investment tend towards stagnation, and in some instances, in some reports, is shown to be only £2 billion more than the start-off period of 2008. What is very important as far as the Nigerian-UK relations is concerned is the fact that some of the very critical driving factors of the economy are things which also fall well outside the purview of the challenges that the United Kingdom sees them as priorities. Immediately coming to mind here, for example, will be the issue of the recent public health challenges that has confronted the whole world. I refer to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is imperative to appraise Nigerian-UK relations on this issue against the backdrop of the tenuous Nigeria's public health system. It is important to reference the diverse support systems put in place as part of UK COVID-19 aid package to sub-Saharan Africa, including sharing learning, best practices and expertise on issues related to global health security, including direct support of the United Kingdom in the areas that the African Union Center for Disease Control has enumerated. In the context of the post-Brexit era, we saw how the discourse on the management of the COVID-19 pandemic panned out in the United Kingdom itself. Of course, much progress has been made, with most citizens of that country having been vaccinated twice as required, and with evidence that the UK is gradually pulling out of its worst moments. If we place its support for Africa and for Nigeria in particular against this backdrop, the concern for us will now be what is the diplomacy that surrounds vaccine access and production? How does that impact on the overall post-COVID era that is envisioned to impact seriously on diverse economic activities in Nigeria? When you take the issue of national security and its associated humanitarian crisis, their impact on agriculture. We'll also see an opportunity here to interrogate Nigerian-UK relations against the backdrop of the foreign and defense policies of the United Kingdom, and to explore the issues that are thrown up by cross-sectoral responses to associated development challenges and aspirations of Nigeria. I raised issues of the COVID-19, Nigeria's food security challenges against its generalized conditions of insecurity as instances of the conundrums that are well illustrated by the changing dynamics that will inform the global environment that the United Kingdom will have to operate in dealing with the countries of the developing South. I made reference earlier to the issue of trade. The question arises, how will the EU vigorously push its global trade agenda in view of the fact that it had assiduously canvassed for the Economic Partnership Agreement, a schema which remains contested and unacceptable to so many African countries, Nigeria in particular. The conflicts between the trade development needs of Nigeria and other African countries, whether in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area or the global context of the World Trade Organization, as evidenced by the stalled Doha development rounds, are some of the multilateral and bilateral trade arrangement issues that must be located very squarely within the foreign economic relations of the United Kingdom and Nigeria. Talks of so-called support, Western support, in this case, US assistance support for the development of the African Continental Free Trade Area, or even of Nigeria-UK bilateral trade relations, is not only confusing, but what is worse, leaves one at times with a feeling of suspicion as to the true intent of these quote unquote supports and aid for trade. So at the economic realm, there will particular focus on the question of trade. The question which remains unanswered is, how would the UK government fund aid for trade for Nigeria and other sub-Saharan African countries after Brexit? And how does it intend to reallocate its fund and direct support that has been channeled via the EU for aid for trade projects after the transition period of Brexit ends? It is very important to note that as Nigeria continues to contend with marriage, development, and security issues, including internal dynamics that revolve around the growing disaffections by various subnational entities, that there will be a critical need to review the so-called United Kingdom strategy for engagement with sub-Saharan Africa. I will conclude my presentation by recommending that it is also very imperative for Nigeria to begin to review its own diplomatic relations in critical areas of trade, security, environment, and such related matters, and place these things squarely within the context of a revised policy towards the United Kingdom. The jury is still out, as it were. We know for sure that by the time the entire transition program is completed, that the face of the United Kingdom that we will see post-Brexit will be entirely different. We will be confronted increasingly by a United Kingdom that will look inward and only engage with the world on basis which may not be too radically different from nationalistic standpoints. Perhaps Nigeria's foreign economic and defense policy must begin to take more seriously than ever regional arrangements, because it is only on this platform that Nigeria's credentials and endowments can be enhanced significantly to the extent where it can negotiate very meaningfully with powerful states and entities, in this case, that of the United Kingdom. That is my conclusion, and I thank you for the opportunity you have given me to make this presentation. Hello, are you there? Hello.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chidi, for your presentation. As we can see, Professor Fagi is waiting, and we'll proceed straight to take Professor Fagi's paper. His paper is on Professor Fagi's paper is on Nigerian foreign policy and insecurity in the Sahel. I guess he's ready. Professor Fagi, you have the floor.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay.
Let me
thank you for
then
giving
we can
me
off.
the opportunity.
Okay, you want to use the tab?
Yes, because I'm no longer
Hello?
presenting my paper.
Oh my God. Hello.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear you, sir.
Okay. Let me go ahead. I said, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my paper entitled Nigeria's Foreign Policy and Insecurity in the Sahel. I will briefly highlight the key points of the paper. Now, I started by saying that the Sahel is literally known as the Africa south of the Sahara, which is from the Sahara in the north to the Savannah area. And now this area covers over 3 million square kilometers. So since our own independence in 1960, this area presents a kind of admixture of opportunities and challenges to Nigeria's foreign policy. Now, for us to understand, we have to situate the Nigerian foreign policy in its own context. Since our own independence, our leaders, successive leaders, tend to visualize Nigeria's foreign policy in terms of concentric cycle. The basic philosophy behind that is that the nearer the area, the closer or the higher the interest of Nigeria in that area. So the Sahel being an area which Nigeria belongs and which most of Nigeria's neighbors belong is of great interest to Nigeria. So there are reasons why this area provides both opportunities and challenges to Nigeria. One factor is historic. For long, since before colonialism, Nigeria, even before the existence of modern Nigeria, the people of Nigeria and the people within the Sahel have a long history of contact, both diplomatic contact, economic contact in terms of trade, long distance trade and other things, cultural affinities and so on. So this factor is one of the reasons why up to today, Nigeria considers the area as an area of primary concern to us. Another factor is the geopolitical factor. Like I said, Nigeria literally belongs to this area, and her neighbors also belong to this area. And one thing is that within this area, Nigeria is the largest in terms of population, the largest economy. So it's, if you look at like within West Africa, about 70% of the population is Nigerian. And Nigeria also controls over 70% of the economy in that place. So there is that consideration also. Now, another factor that I'll talk about is strategic and security concern. This area happens to be predominantly Francophone countries. Majority of the countries in the area were French colonies, and they have very close political, military, and security relation with their former mentor. They also have very close economic relationship. So all that, they have very close tie with their own former mentor. But unfortunately for us, our relationship with France has been very frosty. It has not been, political. One thing is we see France as a challenge to us, and also France sees Nigeria as a challenge to her own interests, even though in terms of economic interaction, if we put the volume of trade between Nigeria and France is higher than with all her neighbors, former colonies combined. But for that security and historical ties that France has, it sees Nigeria as a major challenge. So that is why Nigeria has to tread rather carefully in the area in order not to reimpose the negative propaganda of France to sell in the region. So Nigeria tried to adopt what is known as good neighborly relations with her own neighbors, so as not to frighten them to be much more closer and be a threat. Let's not forget the role France played in Nigerian civil war, which she tried at that time very hard to get Nigeria's neighbor to support the secessionist bid. But Nigeria, through diplomatic, careful diplomacy and other things, was able to draw the attention of the world that it was an internal conflict. And so even our own neighbors refused to join or to take side with France. Had it been they did that, I think the whole story will be a different one by now. Had it been they have supported the French propaganda and they supported will have been a totally new thing. Another factor dealing with this security and strategic concern is that Relatively, this area, the Sahel, has been a highly volatile area. There are so many intrastate conflicts. Some of them resulted into civil wars. Some, kind of ethno-religious conflict in these areas. So, given Nigeria's position and influence in the area, these crises in the area pose great challenge to us in the post-independence era. We can remember issues like the protracted crisis in Chad. Now Mali is having its own problem, and so many other places. And there are similar beats like in Niger, and other areas. So all this crisis situation. And presently, we have also the issue like Boko Haram. We have issue of banditry and cattle rearers and farmers conflict and so on, herders and farmers conflict, which traverse this area. Some, their origin is not within Nigeria, it's within the neighboring countries. And some their origin, like Boko Haram, is in Nigeria, but they get safe haven in the neighboring countries. So which necessitate a kind of a diplomatic effort so that there will be multilateral agreement to to approach to contain these issues. Because even if Nigeria, for example, succeeds in containing Boko Haram from within, it will resurface if it is in Niger or in Chad or in other places like Cameroon. So this is what, as I said, the issue of very close interest in terms of security. Now, another strategic and security factor is the fact that Nigeria, like most African countries, is a colonial legacy. Our borders are artificial, they are very porous. So they are prone to, infiltration of both arms, drugs, and other things. Now, this has become more serious with the collapse of Libya. Since the collapse of Libya, there has been influx of small and light arms weapons through the neighboring countries, through Niger, to the other side, and our own neighbors. And this infiltration of small and light arm weapons have been a major source of insecurity in Nigeria and its own neighboring countries. We are now witnessing the uprise of various kinds of armament crisis, violent conflict, which, like I said, Boko Haram is one of them. And now we have this issue of herders, farmers conflict, banditry, and other things. Now the state, when it started, it was more of northeastern part of the country. Now it has spread into various parts of the country. A recent report showed that between January to June this year, which means a period of about 6 months, more than 20,000 or so people were killed, rather, lost their life through various kind of conflict, and which are made easier, inflamed by the influx of these small weapons and light arms. So we also see it. And the other thing is these weapons also come through the Gulf of Guinea, the high insecurity that we have. My argument is that that is why the Sahel now constitutes a major plank of Nigeria's foreign policy, given the fact that we have very close affinity, cultural affinity, there is economic relationship, even though, as the last speaker said, intra-African trade is very negligible. But if we look at the volume of trade between Nigeria and her neighbors, mostly is informal trade. If you are looking at the formal trade, you will see it as insignificant because it is not, there is no record of it and so on. But majority of it is informal, and that is why when Nigeria decided to take the decision, this government, to close our own borders, we are seeing the effect of that both in Nigeria and in our own neighbors because of the volume of trade that is informal. So these are some of the issues that I will talk in my paper, or I will present in my paper. This is just a skeleton because it was only yesterday that I was informed that I am to make this presentation. But essentially, Mr. Chairman, this is what my paper is going to contain when I put it right. Thank you very much. Hello? Hello? Okay.
Thank you very much. I think we've done justice to the paper. Thank you very much. We will move on to the next presentation. And it's by Dr. Willie Eselebo. Dr. Eselebo is of the Institute of Peace and Strategic Studies, University of Ibadan. His paper is on border security, issues in Nigeria, a strategic variable for foreign policy. Dr. Eselebo, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Please, could you allow me to share my screen?
Yes, sir, go ahead. You can share your screen.
Okay. Okay. I hope it's clear. Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is my presentation. I want to thank the DG of NIIA and his team for this great opportunity and invitation to me to present on border security issues. Professor Fagin spoke extensively about Sahel. I'm still going to go into it about it. Everything we are doing, foreign policy is about border, it's about bordering, and it's about border making and the rest of them. So the paper focuses on how borders are created, and again, we'll be looking at how they are changed, eliminated, and the role of foreign policy, the role foreign policy play in shaping border and bordering interests and needs. It further explores the dynamic and heterogeneous nature of borders with the creation of ECOWAS in 1975, I take that as a benchmark, which effectively eliminated internal boundaries while creating new borders regions for countries in West Africa region. So furthermore, I examine border security issues in Nigeria and its importance as a strategic variable in foreign policy making. But border is about identity, nationalism, who we are, who they are, inclusion and exclusion. It's about marriage or divorce, relationship building, bonding or separation. Border is about politics too, at the local level, state, regional, and global. And most importantly, it's about national interests, national security, and territorial integrity, much more economic security and the rest of them. And just recently, as we can see, the first casualty of COVID-19 is closure of border. Again, I look at foreign policy. Border making is about multilateral diplomacy, and bordering practices are variable issues in foreign policy. I do not want to go into the definition because everybody here is an expert in that area. But borders in context means that they are constructed to delineate a proximate or shared space. It could be on the basis of politics, legal systems, in terms of territoriality. It defines citizenship and sovereignty of a nation or a country. It talks about the limits of economic spheres. That's why you have customs and excise duties. And border may not be fixated on the ground, but can be virtual as well. And efforts to demarcate borders through fences, walls, rivers, outposts have not resulted in perfect securitization or absolute barrier status, which breaks into context, negotiation of security complexes. So border is conflictual in nature, so we must negotiate. So I adopted negotiation theory as a framework, and is premised on the general belief that all negotiations share the same bargaining features and raise the same set of issues in conflict situations. In terms of border making, it is conflictual. And making a deal is part of foreign policy bargaining. So that explains, it explains border security. We will be looking at border security paradox in Nigeria, which are conflictual and which remains a variable foreign policy transaction. So negotiation theory proposes that you focus on interests, not positions. And we invest heavily in what if questions. That's, you must be taken into consideration tradable. In negotiating border absurdities, Nigeria must calculate the risk and rewards of sharing border with our neighbors, Benin, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. Those are proximate neighbors. At the other level, you have ECOWAS, the Sahel, you have the G5 Sahel, then you have the Chad Basin Authority or Commission that we must work with. So again, I speak so much about, I bring us some thoughts about negotiation theory. And in this context, border and bordering practices are specific kinds of spatial practices which occur at the strategic levels of negotiation in foreign policy. So, and foreign policy is about maintenance of territorial integrity with other countries and maintenance of its political independence. And in Nigeria, in that case, most attention is devoted to promotion of African unity and peaceful settlement of disputes. But again, we look at border and security. So, but border security is protecting our borders from harm, the illegal movement of weapons, drugs, contraband, and people trafficking while promoting lawful entry and exit. So safe border or borders are essential to internal security, protection of identity, national interests, territorial integrity, and security, including economic interests as well. So we have the types of borders: lands, air border space, maritime borders, virtual border. The air border, in terms of airports, security is a bit tight there, but in the context of land borders and maritime borders, there are problems. Again, we find that this is defined by the direction of threats. They are coming mostly from ECOWAS. The one coming from ECOWAS are related to the ECOWAS Transhumance Protocol. The G5 Sahel has some elements of insurgency and terrorism. The Chad Basin, the same thing. And the Gulf of Guinea will have maritime piracy. But this is the length of our borders. We have almost 4,047 kilometers of land frontiers and 83 kilometers of maritime in the Gulf of Guinea. This is just a map bringing together the Sahel, the Chad. But furthermore, I had to illustrate it here. You can find that in ECOWAS, most of the problems are coming as a result of former headers conflicts that has taken more lives. We've lost so many lives due to this problem. But the inflow is also from the Sahel, and it's also from the Chad Basin and the rest of them. And if you look at this is the Sahel region in context, and it comprises of so many other countries without Nigeria. That is beyond Nigeria. You have Algeria, Libya, and the rest of them. We have problems in some of these areas, and there's the inflow of small arms and light weapons from that direction. This is the Chad Basin where Boko Haram currently occupies, and is problematic in terms of insurgency and transborder terrorism. So border security and foreign policy linkages. Even traditionally, delimitation and demarcation takes place in boundary making, and the procedure entails international treaty making, pursued through negotiation as an instrument of foreign policy. You cannot demarcate or delimit the border space on your own. So again, this brings into context why foreign policy is very, very important in the context of border security and border studies. So Nigeria is, again, is a source, transit, and destination country for human, drug, and arms trafficking, including smuggling. So we need to play a critical role in the fight against this by which I don't we think. It ratified the UNODC, United Nations Office on Drug and Crimes, Transnational Organized Crimes Protocol early in 2000, the ECOWAS Transhumance Protocol, which I earlier told you, including assisting the Sahel region to reduce the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. So this, again, the stationing of multinational joint task force in the Lake Chad Basin, with forces contributed by Benin, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger, shows that there's a linkage between border management or border governance and foreign policy. This is more enlarged when we also look at the Abuja Treaty and the Lagos Plan of Action, and look at what is happening in African Union with 8 RECs as regional economic communities of Arab Maghreb Union, Common Market, COMESA, Committee of Sahelian States, ACAS, and we also look at ECOWAS and IGAD and SADC. So we must necessarily connect with all these 8 regional economic communities, either diplomatically through ECOWAS or through other means bilaterally. Now, why insecurity thrives? If we begin to look at the categories of insecurities plaguing our borders in Nigeria presently, this is a contemporary problem. We have smuggling of drugs, arms, human trafficking. We have high-level infiltration because the borders are porous. As I speak to you, we have more of illegal routes than, or unauthorized routes than legal entry routes. The statistics is about 87 as against 1,407. We have about 1,407 illegal entry routes. So like Dan Bazal said, the former Minister of Interior, why insecurity thrives is that, like the mosquito, insecurity thrives more in corrupt and poorly governed environments with weak institutions. So most of our borderlands, out of the 4,047 kilometers, are ungoverned spaces. I look at this in the context of our contemporary problems. So what do we do? What we need to do essentially is to recalibrate our foreign policy objectives beyond protection of territoriality to engage RECs, taking into consideration complexities, uncertainties, risks, and rewards. We need to improve on security architecture related to borders in addressing criminal activities of non-state armed groups. In this context, I'm advocating securitization of border to ward off TOCs, terror, insurgency. We can see this at playing. Border is part of international policies and diplomacy. We see it even when Donald Trump came to power. His first objective was to make sure that he built wall around Mexico border, because that was to ward off drug barons and rest of them coming to America. And actually, he started the construction. And then, given the example from the first presenter, if we think about Brexit too, it's about border and bordering. UK wanted to secure its territory and make sure that insecurities are reduced to the barest minimum. So well-coordinated regional security engagement with African peace and security architecture, which is a framework for regional security. I also look at the African Standby Force, an enhanced joint border patrol that should be introduced. Presently, it exists between Nigeria and Benin. There are foreign policy issues between Nigeria and Niger too. This is a very good example. We also witnessed during this period as early as 1999 that there were lots of foreign policy agenda like border closure that came up. After that, we had the COVID-19 border closure. Then we also need to raise the bar in defining foreign policy objectives through the use of integrative negotiation. That should be based on interests of friendly countries. And we need to be assertive, using distributive, that's positional as model in dealing with adversaries and non-state actors. By this, I mean that Nigeria is in a good position to exercise its military strength in dealing with adversaries and people who are out to undermine our border security network. Therefore, in moving forward, we should acknowledge it is easy to fall prey to the status quo that keep us from developing improved standards of negotiation theory in managing border security absurdities. We should take into cognizance traditional ways which distort our thinking, and whether there are better approaches to understanding contemporary problems of security in Nigeria. Although it would be unrealistic to expect miracles, it should be possible to improve our foreign policy strategies in dealing with our neighbors. That depends on developing common and well-defined principles and clear foreign policy objectives on border security. Everywhere you go, border is a security matter now. So conclusively, in looking back and going forward and setting the agenda for Nigerian foreign policy, we must not only understand the threats, but also look at the directions where the problems are coming from in order to strategize on how to deal with existing and future cross-border insecurities. I want to thank you all for this great opportunity to be with you and to make my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Senebo. You kept the time that was allotted to you, and we are quite grateful for that. We are very sure that you did justice to that paper. Thank you very much, Dr. Senebo, once again.
Thank you, sir.
I want to find out if Professor Pamshar is available.
Sam is available.
Okay, thank you. Professor Pamshar is from the University of Jos. He's the next presenter. He's presenting a paper on Nigeria and Global Multilateral Organization, UN, Bretton Woods, etc. Professor Pamshar, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I can do is to, can you hear me, please?
I can hear you.
So what I've been asked to do is to have a reflection around the topic Nigeria and global multilateral institutions like the UN and Bretton Woods, institutions. And so for the purpose of the discussion, I think my reflections would be around that, to discuss Nigeria relationship with global multilateral institutions, to evaluate the impact of these relationships. And I would also try to make suggestions on ways in which these relationships can be beneficial to Nigeria, and also have a small reflection on what role should foreign policy actors play in improving a relationship between Nigeria and multilateral institutions. So my main argument, I want to state this before I go into the paper. Hopefully, if I don't have time, it should be clear from the word go what the arguments I'm trying to pursue. So the first point that I want to make is that multilateral institutions and multilateralism indeed was originally designed to stabilize the anarchy which was witnessed in the global political and economic capitalist order. And I think this is still a very strong point, for most political economists who see, the role of multinational, multilateral institutions as actors that stabilize, the world capitalist order. The second point that I thought I should make is that both big and small nations therefore submit themselves or commit themselves to multilateralism in order to maximize national interests and at times the interest of the ruling elites, in their nations. The third point is that, however, the unequal governance architecture of global multilateral institutions serve as a major obstacle in maximizing the interest of a large section of nations, particularly poor ones. And so this unequalness in most multilateral institutions is a big factor, and I'm sure we are all aware of the debates around this and the needs, for their reforms. And the last point that I want to make is that Nigeria can use both domestic and global opportunities to maximize its interests and the interest of other poor nations, particularly its regions around it, ECOWAS, and also neighbors in the global south. So I think that we should use what we have in order to improve our conditions within these multilateral institutions because of the obvious advantages and benefits that we'll get from this. And this is a subject that I'll return to. So multilateralism often involves several nations acting together as if it is in the UN and other regional organizations. It could be military alliances, it could be pacts, it could be groupings like ECOWAS, NATO, and the rest. And these institutions are created in order to increase their ability to seek their own interests, like I've mentioned. They also encourage the coordination of global issues, by facilitating exchange of information. They play roles in helping poor countries, for instance, to have their voices heard, and also to enable them influence global public policies. They allow also the great powers to influence one another and also to have a peaceful environment. There are a lot of reasons why multilateralism, it's important, and the various theories that scholars, have brought out, either as the rational choice theories or the Marxist theories or the several other theories, have explained. So I wouldn't take time to go into that discussion here. But it's important to make the point that Nigeria belongs to several multilateral institutions, the UN agencies, ILO, up to UN Women, Food and Agricultural Organization. Nigeria belongs to continental organizations, our only one, African Union. We belong to ECOWAS. We're members of financial institutions like the World Bank, IMF, and several. And of course, like a discussion of all this is impossible here. So what I've been asked to do is to look at UN agencies and financial institutions. Even those ones would not be able, we can't handle them within 15 minutes, but I will just do a general discussion around benefits that we can gain, from these institutions. So let me take the other angle of my argument, which is about the evaluation, of Nigeria's role in these institutions. Have we benefited anything? And I would say yes, there are lots of benefits, and one can point out to the existence of international conventions, which have shaped, many national policies. We have presently legal frameworks, we have policy frameworks, we have institutional frameworks, on different levels and in different sectors, whether they are agriculture, industries, ICT, and so on, and all that. There are international conventions, that have influenced this, including the most popular ILO conventions that have helped to shape, our labor laws. We have international rules, shaping organizations and our governance. The anti-corruption law, in the country is a derivation of some of the global rules. Rules on money laundering, anti-money laundering, and counter-terrorist financing are also derivation. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go on, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm also trying to make the point that global development policies also shape development priorities. So we have seen how, oh, okay, so the point I'm making that SDGs, for instance, is a derivation of these international goals. We have benefited from these multilateral institutions in terms of accessing funds for educational, social, cultural, and industrial development in the country. These global institutions have supported national leadership and national institutions in a variety of ways through advice and technical support. We are benefiting from trade and investments within ECOWAS, for instance. Regional stability is one of the goal. I mean, the outcome of this. We are expected to have an increase in one of the components of national power, which is prestige at regional and continental level because of our relationship, with these big organizations. Now, since there is no time to give statistics on what I have said, but I think the bigger paper will contain this information. Now, I also think that we've not done well in our relationship with these international global multilateral institutions, and I've followed developments around what we sign as conventions or protocols, and the argument has been made that state officials go and sign them, and sometimes the political leaders don't have detailed ideas about what has been signed, and I think that's a major cause of worry. There seems to be a low coordination, on what's going on in these multilateral institutions as it affects our own countries, and this is a story of Africa generally and other and other countries in the global south. So that coordination is required. I also point out the fact that there's usually non-adherence to what has been signed, in these international conventions or protocols. For instance, the rights of people in the labor angle, unions cry, against the denial of rights to collective bargaining, devotion of national resources to meet some targets of development of either education or agriculture. So our countries, and particularly Nigeria, has been accused of not devoting enough resources so that targets which they have signed in these international documents are achieved. At regional levels, ECOWAS, for instance, we are being accused, we have been seen as people who are just occupying big positions, but without reproducing, ourselves within the region. And I call that we are just occupying without reproducing, using the biblical word of go and occupy, but we just occupy, but you need to reproduce. So we're just being seen as an unproductive hegemony, within ECOWAS, and I think that we need to do more. Multilateral policies are alien. Sometimes they are just sent to us, and the story of the structural adjustment program by the IMF, is a point to reflect on here. And this raises a lot of issues around national ownership of these multilateral rules, that are expected, to be adopted by many countries, including Nigeria. So let me try to round up this discussion by looking at what we can do, as a nation. How can our foreign policy review address issues that I've raised? And I want to point out the fact that our foreign policy should be implemented to achieve maximum benefits in ECOWAS. We must be present. We must be seen as dominantly. We must be seen dominantly being effective, of course, without bullying smaller nations. And this is what I would call a positive or productive hegemony. And that's what we require, in West Africa, for instance, and also try to make ourselves known continentally, as we're presently doing, but with much more effect. Two, I think there should be, there is a need for effective coordination in dealing with multilateral institutions in order to achieve maximum benefits. So instead of having the anarchic nature of just signing agreements and not knowing what we've signed, and following up and ensuring that targets are achieved, should be looked at much more carefully. I think that our foreign policy designers must understand the political economy of these multilateral institutions being controlled by powerful states. And therefore, if we understand it from this way, we should be able to continue the fight, for reforms and for the democratization, of these multilateral institutions. Nigeria's presence in the leadership of these multilateral institutions must be used to enhance national prestige. And of course, I'm referred to Professor Bande, who just left the leadership of the UN, of course, is still representing us there. Mama Kunjoela is there. African Development Bank, we have a member there. And in OPEC, also have a Nigerian. So how do we use these leaders, to improve our prestige and also to have tangible economic benefits for the nation? On a final note, I think that for us to achieve all that I have recommended, we need a very strong and committed political leadership that can pursue this. We need a strong parliament to adapt global conventions and policies and moderate their effects, on our own national populations and our own economy of this country. And so for our presence, to be felt, and for Nigeria to play more key roles in multilateral institutions, and help us achieve our foreign policy goals, and we must play our roles very well in order to promote and protect national interest, promote African integration, promote the international cooperation and consolidation of universal peace, and also to promote a just and a global economic order. Colleagues, this is what I thought I should put on the table as my thoughts in addressing the topic that has been given to me. There are more information and statistics, in the larger documents that I would submit. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bamsha. Professor Bamsha, thank you very, very much. I made that error, sorry. I'm very sorry about that. We're proceeding to the next paper. The next paper is by Dr. Joshua Bobarewa. The following paper is on Nigeria and Africa, multilateral agencies, the EU, ECOWAS, etc. Sorry about that. Dr. Bola's paper is on Nigeria, Africa, multilateral agencies as the AU, ECOWAS, and other, etc. Dr. Bolarewa is from the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, NI. Dr. Bolarewa, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. I also want to join the existing protocol of the established I want to okay. My paper is on Nigeria and Africa's multilateral agencies or international organizations. It's just directly a subset of the earlier paper presented by Professor Pamsha. He was talking of global multilateral institutions or organizations, while I'm talking about the continental organizations and agencies. Right from independence, Nigeria has actually been laying a lot of emphasis on multilateralism as the core of our external relations and diplomacy. And due to this, multilateralism is not just an option, it is simply inevitable in our external relations. For strategic, military, security, economic, and social considerations have made the entire world so strongly connected that Nigeria cannot afford to fold our arms and not get involved in the happenings around our for survival and the realization of our interests. The complexity of multilateralism and globalization makes it imperative for Nigeria to be a key player in world affairs, especially in Africa, which is rightly our constituency. Africa also looks forward and even looks up to Nigeria to play a more active and passionate role in international organizations and world affairs, not only for the benefit of Nigeria itself, but in particular for Africa and the entire Black race in the world. Nigeria's participation in multilateral organizations and agencies have been very fascinating since 1960. It's been filled with challenges, it's been filled with so many benefits and other outcomes, to the extent that Nigeria joined the membership of the United Nations and the Commonwealth of Nations as early as 1960, even few days into our independence. And Nigeria agreed to join hands with other nations to maintain peace, stability, and prosperity around the world. In fact, the first Prime Minister of Nigeria, Alhaji Tafawa Balewa, did not mince words when he said that Africa will be the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy while maintaining cordial relations with all other countries of the world. Hence, since 1960, Nigeria has joined the membership of numerous multilateral agencies to this present time. So having said this, it is very well known that certain principles, certain dynamics guide Nigeria's relations with many parts of the world. And one major rationale for Nigeria's membership of several multilateral organizations or agencies, even as well as bilateral relations within Africa and beyond, is to promote economic development. And all of this is the primacy behind every external relations that Nigeria has, or even any other nation. And Nigeria also plays even a hegemonic leadership role in most of these agencies. And in the same way, Nigeria, with its human and material resources, yearns to translate all of these resources to develop the country, thus for the benefits of the country itself and the citizens at large. So Nigeria has in no small measure contributed to world affairs since 1960, particularly within Africa. Nigeria has done so well. This paper is divided into 7 parts, and the conclusion, I've just tried to speak to the conclusion now. In the second part of the paper, I try to give what I call conceptualizing multilateralism and a framework. I adopted the rational choice approach or framework to explaining this. And in conceptualizing multilateralism, I try to establish that at its core, multilateralism refers to coordinating relations among 3 or more states in accordance with certain principles. But what precisely are those principles that we talk about in multilateralism, conceptualizing what multilateralism stands for? And to what precisely do these principles pertain? And in giving a lot of answers to this, Lisa, Martin, even Rugi, all present precise and useful definition of the institution of multilateralism. In his article titled Multilateralism, the Anatomy of an Institution, according to this definition, the institution of multilateralism consists of 3 principles. And those principles are indivisibility, non-discrimination, or generalized organized principles. And the third one is to diffuse reciprocity. When we say indivisibility, that's illustrated by collective security arrangements where an attack on one is considered an attack on all. So all of us are coming together from a multilateral approach or platform to tackle our common problems or general problems together. When we say non-discrimination implies that all parties be treated similarly and equally as it's in the use of most favored nation status in trade agreements. And the third one, diffuse reciprocity implies that states do not rely on specific or quid pro quo exchanges, but on longer term assurances of balance in their relations. So it is the belief that in the utility of multilateralism was expressed after World War II in a drive to create many international organizations which are also considered as multilateral institutions or multilateral platforms or fora where member states will be able to have beneficial exchanges that will maximize their membership of such multilateral organizations. And the biggest of it, just like Professor Pamsha said earlier, is the United Nations, which has been the front line of multilateral platform for the common good of humanity. The third part of the paper, I talked about the involvement of Nigeria's multilateral policy. The involvement of Nigeria's multilateral policy, which has been an idea right from the beginning, as I mentioned earlier. And Nigeria has always had this posture, even in Africa. No wonder as early as 1960, the founding fathers of Nigeria's foreign policy, and also even one of them, our main Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa, declared that Africa is the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy, have been issued. So Nigeria has always been motivated to act for in place, and 4, to respect Africa and Africans right from 1960. These have been within our programs, our foreign policy, our foreign engagements, especially within Africa and even in global affairs up to date. We can see Nigeria's role even in supporting Pan-African movement, though it was something that started outside Africa. But specifically, even Nigerians attended the Pan-African Conference in Manchester in 1945. Even after World War II, a lot of other activities at the multilateral stage, Nigeria participated fully in it. The pivotal role of Nigeria in global politics through multilateral institutions was already ingrained since 1919, when Nigeria and other British West African countries like the Gambia, Ghana, Sierra Leone formed what then was called National Congress of British West Africa, with the sole objective of liberating the continent from the colonial yoke. In fact, a delegation was sent in 1920 to London, and this demanding for greater participation of Africans in their own domestic affairs, even during the colonial times. And Lord Mina, the colonial secretary at that time, rejected all their demands. But despite this rejection, something great happened. Perhaps was one of the major reasons that fueled the need to strengthen the unity of Africans towards emancipation and decolonization of the continent, which had been on the agenda of Nigeria's Africa's engagement right from 1960. Therefore, the establishment of this National Congress of British West Africa laid a solid foundation for the future multilateral undertakings in Nigeria. So the idea behind the multilateral organization was that it is far better to act in unison than on individual basis, which in most cases, if you act individually, you may not be able to achieve your aims or your objectives that you want. But when you act in unison as one, it will be a joint action, a solid action, which will have all included in such one voice. And that has been the basis for Nigeria's adoption of multilateralism in Africa's engagement and beyond. Apart from that, even by 1950s, some African countries already have become an independent entity, and in this case, countries like Egypt, Ghana, Libya, Algeria, all of them have been routing for the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, which did not come to light until Nigeria got her independence in 1960. So Nigeria's independence actually gave much impetus to the desire for an African continental organization for African unity and development. And by 1963, Nigeria joining starting the Monrovian movement, which was seen as very conservative, as against the Casablanca radical group led by Morocco, Algeria, and Ghana. Eventually, all of them came to a one point as a united front, and we had the Organization of African Unity. A lot of other things were created. It was also even earlier that Nigeria proposed the establishment of West African Examination Council, which actually came in 1952, even before Nigeria's independence. So all of these were Nigeria's role in multilateral agencies, institutions in Africa, for the benefit of not only Nigeria as a country, but for other African countries as a whole. So beyond this, Nigeria has also done a lot of things, the establishment of ECOWAS, though earlier Nigeria had routed for the establishment of ECOWAS early in the 1960s, which other West African countries did not accept. They tried to perceive Nigeria, or they had the feeling that Nigeria wanted to just dominate them population-wise, enough money or funding, all of this. So they were afraid. They didn't support it until 1975, when Nigeria under President Yakubu Gowon and Yesunde Yadema of Togo had to create what we call the West African ECOWAS, created ECOWAS in 1975. Nigeria also had in African Union from OAU to AU, Nigeria has done a lot of things. A lot of other things are highlighted in this paper. Apart from that, Nigeria also, within the African Union or the African continent, the Lagos Plan of Action for Africa's Development, the economic blueprint was hosted in Nigeria, chaired, moved by Nigeria, and it was adopted in Nigeria on April 30th, 1980. The same thing, Abuja Treaty 1991, up to Nepal, and all of these things, Nigeria have done so well to participate. Let me quickly go to the recommendation because of time. In concluding, the paper has done a panoramic review of Nigeria and multilateral agencies in Africa, especially Nigeria's multilateral diplomacy independence. The paper reviewed that Nigeria's relative advanced economy in Africa propelled it to shoulder most of the continental responsibilities from 1960. Such responsibilities have allowed Nigeria to sponsor and direct affairs of Africa through multilateral institutions and agencies like ECOWAS, the OAU, now the AU, the African Continental Free Trade Area, Nepal, all other institutions, and even the UN, amongst others. As a result of this, Nigeria has been able to position herself as a leader within the African continent, though with many challenges. Within the West African sub-region, Nigeria has employed ECOWAS to advance its economic interests in West Africa, which has ultimately enabled it to capture and at least in modest form the regional markets. Thus, Nigeria's multilateral diplomacy in Africa has yielded many benefits, which can be improved and leveraged upon for the advancement of its national interest. Again, Nigeria should, as a matter of urgency, improve its industrial production, manufacturing capacity, and infrastructural deficiency in order to make it to take full utilization and absolute advantage of its economic potentials. Nigeria needs to consolidate its leadership role in a positive manner so as to take full advantage of the implementation of the Continental Free Trade and in other multilateral agencies in Africa. Finally, the last sentence, Nigeria must re-establish its leadership position in Africa. Thus, for Nigeria to take full utilization of multilateral diplomacy within Africa and beyond, its economic sector premised on diversification and infrastructural development must be reinvigorated. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bolarima. You have done very well. Distinguished academics, I would want to quickly recognize the presence of the following distinguished professors that are here with us that are online right now. Professor Waris Wali, you're welcome. Professor Alatif Awale from the University of Ife, you're welcome. Professor Hassan Saliu from the University of Ilorin, you're welcome. And Professor Cyril Obi, our own Cyril Obi, you're welcome. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please, you have to bear with us. We are going straight into the second session because we have eaten so much into the time that allotted for the second session. So we'll not go on break, we'll proceed straight to the second session. The second session will take first paper in the second session by Professor Victor Adetula. Professor Adetula is of the University of Jos, and his paper is on Nigeria and the European Union. Professor Adetula, if you are on with us, you have the floor. Thank you. If Professor Adetula is with us, please, you have the floor. Professor Adetula, please unmute your system, unmute yourself.
He's not on seat. Yes. When he comes back.
Okay.
Prof just stepped out, so you can go on. He just stepped out.
If Professor Jesma is already available, we'll take the next presenter, Professor Waris Wagi. Professor, are you available? Professor Ali, are you available?
Is he still online? He left the other time. You know, he's attending another conference.
Do you want Professor Shedrack best before you? Huh?
Yes, Professor Shedrack Best is available.
Okay.
Okay, then, Professor Shedrack Best, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for fast tracking my presentation. I want to appreciate the Institute, and I hope you can hear me. Can you indicate by raise of hand?
We can hear you very well. We can hear you
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm asked to discuss Nigeria and its neighbors. This looks simplistic because we live with the neighbors, and so there's a lot we see every day. But as a background, all over the world, nations pay attention to relationships and to diplomacy with neighbors or with the countries that neighbor them in their international relations. It's always been the experience. Example, if you look at the United States, it takes its relationship with Canada to the north seriously, and to the south with Mexico, with Cuba, and the rest of South America. You can say the same of European nations. They have good diplomatic relations over centuries with their neighbors. Same with the Koreas, North and South Korea. Those relationships are not taken for granted. You can say the same about India and Pakistan. So Nigeria is no exception to this general rule. The neighbors, to start with, are important in any international relations and diplomacy. They've been part of Nigeria's foreign policy, and managing the neighbors is critical to our achieving the objectives of our foreign policy. In our experience, ECOWAS has come to be an important element in the definition of our neighbors. But then who are our neighbors? I think simply put, our immediate neighbors would form the first or the innermost circle of who our neighbors are. And the immediate neighbors are Benin Republic to the west, Niger Republic to the northwest, Chad to the northeast, and Cameroon to the east. And all of these four countries, with the exception of Benin Republic, share the Lake Chad. They are partakers in the Lake Chad. All of them were also colonized by the French, interestingly. So Nigeria is surrounded by nations that came from a French colonial legacy. We can also add Equatorial Guinea to the direction of the Atlantic Ocean and in the Gulf of Guinea. From the 1980s, a discussion of Nigeria's neighbors has come to include Equatorial Guinea because of two main factors: our consideration of citizens, Nigerian citizens who live in other countries near us, and also because of this geostrategic importance of the Gulf of Guinea in terms of the resources and the other issues. But since the Buhari presidency, we have witnessed Niger Republic acquire a higher level of significance as a neighbor. This is perhaps for lineage reasons, historic reasons, and for cultural reasons. The ECOWAS region is the next level of neighbors that Nigeria may be said to have. And the issues that we find in ECOWAS are not too different from what we will find with our immediate neighbors, because you're going to find a common denominator being the role of France, especially in the Francophone countries, against the role of Nigeria as a regional hegemon in the West African sub-region. We can also talk about the physical and geostrategic environment of the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Guinea. Historically, the peoples and the tribes in the area surrounding Nigeria have related with different degrees of intensity. But the 1884 Berlin Conference defined the boundaries and the borders that differentiate these countries today. And at the end of this definition, left behind a number of boundary problems, a number of lineage problems, a number of issues related to affinity of these nations and its peoples. But most of these today affect our foreign policy. Nigeria is an Anglophone country surrounded by Francophone countries. But the interesting thing is that at the end of colonial rule, France was able to extract monetary, economic, and political commitments, as well as military commitments from her colonies. And this has kept these colonies largely dependent on France. And this is a baggage that Nigeria's foreign policy and diplomacy must face, because it has affected our relationship, not only with our immediate neighbors, but also with France. Notwithstanding the fact that Nigeria does have bilateral relations with our neighboring countries, indeed all neighboring countries, but in spite of that, it hasn't quite watered down the impact of France on their relationship with Nigeria. The principles that have guided Nigeria's relationship with the neighbors have been, first of all, the principle of good neighborliness and friendship with all neighbors. Secondly, non-interference in the domestic affairs of our neighbors. Thirdly, what we call safe friendship with a view to protecting Nigerian citizens who are in large numbers in some of these neighboring countries. We have also been guided by the principle of sovereign equality of the nations, mindful of the fact that we are not of equal size. Then peaceful relations with our neighbors and the avoidance of confrontation in the way we relate. Now, all of these principles have aimed to stabilize the West African region and to avoid Nigeria being a large country and a hegemon threatening the other countries in the region. In looking at the West Africa region and Nigeria with our neighbors generally, it is important to highlight ECOWAS as a main framework for multilateral diplomacy, which Nigeria uses in the region in order to relate to our neighbors. And this will include, first of all, like I said, the immediate neighbors, those countries that share physical boundaries with Nigeria, and then the ones immediately after. And all of them are subject to the influence of what I have called the French factor. Now, the French factor is central to discussing the foreign policy of Nigeria and her neighbors, because all of these countries are relatively, compared to Nigeria, relatively weak Francophone countries that have maintained bilateral agreements with France in the areas of currency, in the areas of trade and the economy generally, in the areas of political leadership and regime stability and security. France has been the big eye in military issues and in security issues. And all of these have played out at different times in the history of Nigeria and these countries. Particularly during the Civil War, it was very evident that the role of France and the neighbors in supporting Biafra came to the fore. Now, the dependence of these countries on France entails or means that any discussion on the immediate neighbors, and indeed the wider neighbors of Nigeria that have affinity with France, would also mean that a lot of that discussion is taking place with France, because many of them would have to clear with France what they're doing with Nigeria. And there's a lot of documentation to show that. Recently, even in the establishment of the multinational joint task force that is aimed to fight insurgency in the north of Nigeria, the neighboring countries of Cameroon, Niger Republic, and Chad have had to clear with France before they could go forward with this security arrangement. So in relating with our neighbors, we must consider the shadow party that France is as an external player, albeit not an insignificant player. So in spite of the presence, the strong presence of France in the Nigerian economy, as has been alluded to, we know that even though relations may be frosty between Nigeria and France, France remains an actor in the Nigerian economy as well as in the relations of our immediate neighbors. Now, the final part of this discussion, I want to look at what are the issues for our foreign policy in dealing with our immediate neighbors, for our diplomacy, and where do we pay attention to? Number one, to me, is to articulate a clear national interest with respect to our immediate neighbors and the wider ECOWAS, a particularistic national interest beyond the general. It may conform or coincide with the general, but we need to discuss a kind of a definite and precise, customized national interest for our immediate neighbors. The second area that our diplomacy must look at is the area of commerce, of trade between our Nigeria and our immediate neighbors. A lot of this trade at the moment is informal, and there's a lot of push factor in the direction of Nigeria. A lot of the countries in West Africa and in the immediate neighborhood want to access the Nigerian market through various entry points, whether they are formal or informal, whether they are legal or illegal, but they deploy a lot of ways in order to reach the Nigerian market. We have to manage informal trade and find ways of formalizing some of this trade. There is a lot of illegal trade that is boosted by the illegal routes that enter into Nigeria, a lot of smuggling that is made possible by the poor governance of the borders and our other forms of governance. So what has come to be called informal cross-border trade takes place between Nigeria and our immediate neighbors. Now, the Benin Republic, there are two ports in West Africa that particularly pressurize the Nigerian market, and this is the Cotonou port and the port in Togo. A lot of the import into these ports eventually end up in the Nigerian market, and they do not service some of these smaller countries, perhaps because of the harsh policy framework in Nigeria, or also because of some other factors, corruption. They end up in the Nigerian market and undocumented. Now, our border control management has to be upped, and erratic closures of borders, which a lot of the time do not achieve the purpose for which they take place, they happen because of lack of consistent policy framework in Nigeria. We also have cross-border crime and criminality that should be looked at very closely. There is also the challenge of small arms and light weapons finding their way into the Nigerian market space, and most of them end up in Nigeria because Nigeria appears to be the most profitable destination for small arms and light weapons. And Nigeria has the weakest governance structure, border control structure, and security governance structure, and the weakest security architecture in West Africa. In these smaller countries are better policed, are better security governed than Nigeria. And that is why small arms and light weapons find good entry and a good destination into Nigeria. The northern borders receive the Sahelian challenge, and the weapons that originate from the Sahel capitalize also on the weak state and the failing security governance environment in order to make it into Nigeria. These are issues for our diplomacy. Another thing that I've considered bring to the table is the southern flank, where you have the Bakassi Peninsula stretching into from the Bakassi Peninsula right through the Cameroon border to the Lake Chad Basin. All of these areas, they need to be looked at in order to soften the challenges that come from there. There is also the rising impact of the agitation from the English-speaking side of Cameroon. This is going to implicate Nigeria. So our diplomacy should find a way of dealing with this. Then the challenge from the security challenges of the Sahel that filter down into Nigeria, at least this has been confirmed by the presidency. And I think that it is something for our diplomacy to face. We also have international migrations and social movements, particularly as a result of the economic hardships from some of our neighboring countries and challenges of climate change and the herder movements from the harsher Sahelian climates into the more arid and more friendly terrain in Nigeria. From all over the West Africa region and from the neighboring countries, we have these challenges. And all of them come through our neighboring countries. And the neighbors, interestingly, have stricter border control than Nigeria. Then there is the geostrategic issues from the southern borders. I've talked about the Atlantic Ocean. There are security issues like piracy and marine crimes, and then the oil resources within the Gulf of Guinea region, issues of international navigation and travel, sea travel in the Gulf of Guinea, generally up to the Bakassi Peninsula, as well as the other edible marine resources like prawns, crayfish, and all the others. There is also the challenge of terrorism and counter-terrorism, as well as COVID-19. Now, these challenges
the time is up.
I'm sorry?
Round up. We'll give you 1 minute to round up, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll do so. I think that these are prevalent, especially in the northern flank towards the Lake Chad Basin. And the multinational joint task force is an example of cooperation and diplomacy between the countries that are our neighbors. Finally, I want to look at whether the preferential treatment of Niger Republic has a diplomatic framework, or it's simply enjoying a most favored nation status. I'm not sure, like it is. I don't know what the foreign policy molders would have to say about it. Now, in conclusion, therefore, Nigeria's neighbors form a key and strategic component of her foreign policy and diplomacy. And our interest and commitment should be focused on these neighbors based on the range of issues that I've tried to raise in this discussion. The political environment, internal political environment, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should team up, including NIIA, to look at this. Now, the poor governance from within is also likely to affect what happens at the foreign policy realm. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof, for the paper. We appreciate you, sir. I want to know if Professor Ali is back. Okay. Okay, Professor Adetula. Professor Victor Adetula, sir. Professor Adetula.
Yes, please. I'm here.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. You have the floor, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
I say congratulations to the Institute, and it's good to be back at the Institute again. I recall that this used to be our regular menu in those days when I had the privilege of being part of the team. You recall the brainstorming session. Yes, actually, sir. Yeah. So through this platform, I'm saying congratulations again for reviving this platform, which provides us opportunity to reflect, actually. But part of my prefatory remarks will be that we go beyond this mere reflection to consolidate around each of these thematic area or cluster of it into a kind of working group so that we can tease around the issue better and have enough time beyond reflection to also update our analysis with fresh data, because events in the international system are changing very rapidly, courtesy of ICT and the emergence of new actors that are not necessarily within the boundary of states. Having said that, I'm expected to reflect on Nigeria and European Union. I have adjusted that slightly so that we can focus on recent development around this theme. So I will be looking at Nigeria and the European Union, the Cotonou years and beyond, so that we'll have opportunity to look at what has happened in the immediate past and also make some projection into the future. And there is a sense in which it can be said that a discussion around this theme is very important at this particular time, in that relationship between Nigeria and the European Union is an established one, of course, with origin closely associated with our colonial experience with Great Britain and its consequence. And prior to that time, Nigeria was also benefiting from the Commonwealth trade preference and all have you. But beyond that also, it's very important at this particular time because discussion with respect to post-Cotonou has really advanced. And of course, there is a document that is being looked at on both sides of the Organization of African, Caribbean, Pacific States and the EU. So, and not too far from now, we'll be talking about a successful treaty to that. But beyond that, changes and development in the global system, especially since the end of the Cold War, make it very important for us to take a rethink as to what is going to be Nigeria's position with respect to post-Cotonou. And when we talk about the changes, I think some colleagues have already started talking about Brexit. And you know, Brexit is very important for us because Nigeria made it into the European Union relationship under ACP, partly as a result of development that necessitated the accession of Great Britain in 1971. So it's very, very important what will happen now that Great Britain is out of it, and Nigeria may have to be regularly confronted with France, which is a dominant hegemon within the EU. But beside all those global changes, we have issue of the emergence of new power and a lot of carrots that is coming from some of the Brexits that are positioning themselves as alternative to European Union. So if you put all this together, you agree with me that it's imperative for Nigerian government essentially to pay adequate attention, reappraise its capability against its value and interests, and based on this, advance its interests in the international system. For instance, why Nigeria should be concerned about the future of its relationship with the EU, the Cotonou Agreement, it is important to consider its interests within such arrangement as the EU-driven Economic Partnership Agreement, which Nigeria had not signed up to because of concern about what will be the impact of this on the local industry. Closely related to that are development even within the African continent, including the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and even the existence of ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme. So the question is, what will happen to all this if Nigeria has to latch on again on an arrangement that is either close to what Cotonou Agreement represents or any other, like some colleagues will argue, new colonial arrangements? I've chosen about 3 areas to reflect in terms of what are the gains for Nigeria in its relationship with European Union. And you discover that under the Cotonou Agreement, there are a lot of things that changed from the Lomé regime to Cotonou. And some colleagues since yesterday have talked about the issue of reciprocity, which is now more pronounced under the Cotonou Agreement. And that principle actually gave birth to the EPA, which has made it very, very difficult to talk about a trade that is essentially beneficiary to the global South. And if trade relationship between Europe and Africa will have to be on the basis of reciprocity, definitely the local industry will suffer. And that's why Nigeria has refused to latch on. But even at that, over the years, even from the days of Lume regime, the statistic has always been, oh, Nigeria is benefiting from trade with European Union when we look at the statistics. But what research has shown is that with or without trade arrangement, special trade arrangement with European Union, the trade pattern will still be the same because of oil. One point, that with or without that, European Union countries will still ask for Nigeria. So to look at the structure of trade relationship between Nigeria and the European Union, it does not support the genuine development of Nigeria and other countries within the ACP group. I remember having a conversation with a trade expert from EU who argued that, oh, just where I reside would be good for rose flower. And I jokingly asked my European colleague that, was the industrialization of Europe based on the growth of rose flowers? So how many roses would Nigeria grow to become an industrial state? Essentially, this is just an arrangement to tailor the development of Nigeria in a way that is meets and satisfies the interests of Europe rather than on the needs and priority of Nigeria. Another area I wish to identify for us to look briefly at what has been the gain of Nigeria from the European Union, especially under the Cotonou Agreement. When the Cotonou Agreement came up in year 2000, that was the period Nigeria was just transiting from a military rule to civil rule. And when European Union just lifted the sanction on Nigeria. And of course, after that experience, there was a lot of assistance from European Union to support the political reform and political transition program in Nigeria. And ever since, there have been volume, very substantial assistance to aid Nigeria political transition, democratic transition, good governance, election and support for the electoral process. To date, there have been massive assistance, and the European Union has emerged as one single multilateral provider of such assistance. But even at that, the volume of resources that has come as assistance amounts to very insignificant figure compared to what Nigeria itself is providing for political transition program. This is not to say that Nigeria should not be appreciative, but it's just to emphasize the point that, look, if we are going to put or to evaluate Nigerian gain on the basis of this, we may not have much to record in terms of gain. But even more importantly, like the question of sovereignty, there are areas that cannot be funded by external actors when it comes to political issue. Election is one of such. Election is one of such. So by and large, we cannot, on the basis of what European Union is giving to a democracy in Nigeria, say, oh, yes, it is yet Uhuru. Again, if you look at issue of foreign investment, if you look at issue of support for regional integration, which is very, very critical in Nigerian foreign relations. Yes, there have been a lot of support for regional integration from the days of Lume to today. There are a lot of support for infrastructure development in ECOWAS, direct support even to the ECOWAS secretariat. But if you juxtapose this with the impact of intervention of European Union in intra-regional trade, the record is not very impressive. If we again revisit the issue of EPA and the damage, the actual potential damage that the EPA will do in terms of strengthening the vertical relationship between West African trade and Europe and destroying intra-West African trade, we know that the gain is not as substantial. So if we put all this together, what is the way forward for Nigeria? One of the points, in terms of my own reflection, is that not necessarily for economic reason, for geopolitical benefits, Nigeria should remain in good relationship with European Union. But what will be the pattern of that relationship is the question. Is it feasible that Nigeria continue to operate within the Associate Organization of African, Pacific, and Caribbean states, that is working essentially within the post-Cotonou arrangements and negotiating as a group within the ACP group? That is one option. And that is the option that we are saying has not addressed the peculiarity of Nigeria realities. Nigeria of 1975, when the first Lume was signed, is different from Nigeria of today. There are realities, there are new priorities for Nigeria development that cannot be adequately addressed within the existing arrangements. So what is the way forward if Nigeria must continue or should continue with the European Union? And we look at that, look at South Africa. South Africa has a separate agreement with the European Union that addresses its own peculiarity. Why would Nigeria not look that direction? Nigeria is not the same thing like a lot of ACP countries. Nigeria has its own peculiar realities that a separate arrangement like that of South Africa can be addressed. And that will not be the first time that is happening, even with the European Union. All the North African countries, they are benefiting from the European neighborhood policy, which means they are not even African countries that they are not part of the ACP group. They have a separate treaty with European Union that guarantees them better offer than what we have today. So my honest submission is that Nigeria should start thinking of a separate arrangement, a separate contract, a separate agreement with European Union that will address the peculiarity of its political, economy, and development priority. Mr. Chairman, that is my submission.
Thank you, Paul. That was a good presentation, sir. I want to confirm if Professor Ali, okay, sir, Prof, sir, it's your turn to give us your paper, sir. Professor Ali, you have the floor, sir.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, very well.
Okay, thank God for network masses. Well, thank you. Let me congratulate NIA and the DG for this interesting program, this roundtable. I've been asked to speak to the topic Nigeria, Russia, and East European countries. Well, Nigeria actually has developed a very peculiar relationship with Russia, the successor state to the defunct Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. The relations improved most dramatically since 1999, when President Putin took over the mantle of leadership in Russia. That development has opened up great new opportunities for the improvement of Russia-Nigerian relationship in very, very critical areas. We can look at the Nigeria-Russian relationship historically and identify the critical role of Soviet Union during the Civil War, the subsequent development from that background of very interesting economic relationship, improvement in Russian, investment in Nigeria, the establishment, the critical pillar of that was the establishment of the Ajaokuta Steel Complex, and several other investments, which unfortunately, because of the tardiness at our own end, did not mature into the kind of dream and high expectation we have, thinking that just like the Aswan Dam transformed Egyptian economic life, just like investments and help of the Soviet Union transformed manufacturing and industrial development in India, we did not because of our own failure of governance. Let us, since we have very little time, how do we define or theoretically try to appreciate the relationship between Russia and Nigeria? I think the most appropriate theoretical framework is the complex interdependence theory, which explains that cooperation and interdependence define the character of international relations in a manner that benefits all actors. However, we have known that in this kind of relationship, there will be winners and there will be losers. The losers in this, all partners cannot, when we talk of mutual benefit, of course, we talk in general and that everybody will benefit where we know by one way, reason or the other, some will benefit more than the other. In the case of Nigeria and Russia, our challenge in benefiting optimally from the relationship is our governance weakness, state weakness, inadequate institutions, lack of capacity for statecraft, lack of capacity to strategize, to squeeze, to recognize what is optimal, what is needed, and how to proceed. So therefore, why we say complex interdependence very appropriately help us understand the dynamics of the relationship, we must also immediately recognize that we have problems at our own end. Another thing that complex interdependence talk about is sensitivity and vulnerability. That in a complex interdependence relationship, you must look at sensitivity and vulnerability to identify who is going to gain, who is going. And immediately you look at Nigeria, you look at Russia, just as if you look at Nigeria, you look at China, you look at Nigeria, you look at even South Africa, you will see that some of this vulnerability and sensitivity of the Nigerian end tend to put Nigeria at a disadvantage. Now, let us briefly talk about Nigerian foreign policy. Over the years, we have had a situation where every regime tends to develop a paradigm to define and guide the foreign policy. If we itemize all of them, you will find that they are all going around in the same way, all of them built on this notion of Nigeria as the giant of Africa. You know, this particular position undermined our capacity to navigate some of the complexity of contemporary internationalism, because we keep going around with this notion that, oh, we are the big guy and we carry so many burdens that should not actually be ours. If you come forward and we move to the present administration, you will find that we have not done well in international relations at all. We have not positioned ourselves strategically. We have not developed or evolved a paradigm, an approach that will help us to appreciate the dynamic changes in the international system. Take, for example, in the last 2 decades, every major country is trying to cultivate Africa. China, Spain, Japan, France, of course, UK, even US, everybody now is an article of faith that all of them must have a kind of platform. They are all trying to deal with Africa as a block. So they create this platform. The most effective in this has been FOCAC of China, which has grouped and developed a generous framework for engaging us. But what have we done to appreciate these dynamic changes? Now, let me briefly talk about the notion of foreign policy introduced by our foreign minister when he addressed ambassadors not long ago, where he presented critical points of what he considered to be the major issue. 9 points actually identified. And he said, we in Nigeria are not stupid. We know that the economy is an indisputable way to indicate growth and success. Now moving towards the 200 million mark and projected to reach over 400 million by 2050, making it the 3rd most populous country in the world. We have to expand our trade with all the countries of the world. We have to innovate and we have to industrialize to leave our people out of poverty. So international trade and economic diplomacy are the main focus of our foreign policy. Very beautifully said, but when you come to subject this to critical examination, you find yourself, I agree with the Guardian editorial, which said that there is an implicit meaninglessness in the phraseology and fair in foreign policy. That this runs counter to the practice where every country in the world is pursuing national interest and they are the first to themselves. But when you put it up front out there, it is almost to say it is not very correct. Now let us look at Russia. Since 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia entered a new phase. Actually, the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia became the successor state. The first decade after the collapse saw Russia in political wilderness. Yeltsin was confronted myriad of, and the emerging Russian Federation grabs capitalism with just raving. You can compare the entry and the embrace of capitalism by Russia to the strategic calculated entry, the genius of the Chinese CPC movement into what is called socialism with the Chinese characteristics, methodically embracing capitalism, but telling the world they are not doing capitalism, they are doing socialism with Chinese characteristics, if you try to get it. That embrace of capitalism is ruining Russia. In that same vein, Russia lost its position as the successor, could not also take over the mantle as a global superpower. And in that environment, and Russia withdrew from Africa. That decade also coincided with a dark spot in Nigeria's history. Both domestically, we had, that was the time of Babangida, dying days of Babangida, entry of Abacha, and we did not achieve much during that period because of our situation. Human rights became a pariah nation, and Russia was also in wilderness. Until yes, Putin came, and the election of Putin opened a new window of opportunity. And since then, there has been so much improvement in Syria and Russia. And that relationship has now been uplifted with several visits at the highest level, and another window, an increase in Russian investment, improvement in trade, Nigeria and Russia. But more critically, let us move to Sochi. Sochi 2019 October, and the very critical agreement that was signed. President Buhari was so enthusiastic and paid glowing tribute, reminded us of how Russia has been good to us and the hope that Russia will help us. He even added that the Nigeria-Russia relations should move away from just economics and move into fight against terrorism. fight against the financial crimes and so on and so forth. And of course, Putin promised to give Nigeria a lot of support in so many critical areas. Some of the high points of the agreement came out of that social agreement was the following. In fact, I think without going into the list of all the agreements, the most important, as far as I'm concerned, was the agreement for the completion of the Jakarta Steel Complex. Let me say that we went to that meeting poorly prepared for, even though we were in Jakarta, we are interested in Russia coming to take over, we are interested in Russia coming to help us, even rehabilitate our refinery, but we did not have a standing team. On return to Nigeria, that the government put together a high-power team, scientists, professors of atomic energy, encouraging them, and then to help. But as it was later explained, Russian help was not going to be in terms of total financing, but what do they call it? Import-Export Bank, African Import-Export Bank was going to provide the financing. Where are we on this? Of course, we can talk of COVID, we can talk of other challenges. These are just with our general practice of lethargy, lack of adequate preparation of foreign policy, and so many other challenges. We can talk of so many other aspects of this that as our engagement of other Professor Adetula was just a problem of relating with EU, even with Russia, with all the opportunities there, we take, and then we carry this notion of, you know, the leader of that on our head to the detriment of our national ambition. Now, I know I was supposed to speak about this. Tell you that in terms of Eastern Europe, most of the other East European countries, they are not on that, even dealing with them the same way. You know, it's like Professor, somebody was talking, I think it was Ichimi, about Nigeria post-Brexit, UK after Brexit. You can see that we are not negotiating relationship very well. The same thing with EU, the same thing with Russia. We are not managing it well. Many of these European countries, they are not under the umbrella of Russia. Many of Ukraine, for example, is at war with Russia. We have others that are openly antagonistic, EU wanting to join NATO. So in dealing with Russia, let us look at Russia as a major power. I think NIA, by saying, oh, let's Russia is too big to be merged with all these other countries, because the capacity which Russia has, governance, stability, let me tell you, Putin has great success and has helped to rejuvenate international relations. Otherwise, we would have been stuck with a unipolar Trump messed up big time. So, and that has given China a leeway, the kind of progress China is making on the continent. So what are we then supposed to do? Let me say, because the MC there, you are laughing and looking at me, maybe my time is up, I don't know.
Yes, sir.
But
Your time is up, sir. You can just conclude, sir.
Okay, okay. Yes, I have this opinion, what are prospects. And I say, well, there are many challenges, but permit me, indulge me to say that most of the problems are with us. We have to improve. We have to improve our structure of. I know Professor Saliu was making this point yesterday about the weakness of our. Even what we have on ground, we are not using them well. NIA, is it too much for you to have a special desk on Russia or to have a department on China with the way Nigeria-China relationship is exploding? So the foreign affairs also have to improve so that we have, this is one challenge, improving our thing is to ensure that, let me say, make money. If you look at the foreign policy blueprint in Africa, because when it came in there, Russia has developed an elaborate foreign policy for Africa. We have to also figure out how they want to invest. It was Adibe who wrote one interesting piece. He said, what does Russia want in Africa? Trying to look for market. Russia is not even looking for minerals. Russia is looking for arms market, arms and military engagement, military training. So we have to figure out what we want maximally benefit from Russia. The point I'm making is that Russia should be accorded very serious attention. It should recognize strategic partner in the manner we are thinking we have with China, in the manner that UK is trying to get from us. So before I exhaust your, thank you very much for this opportunity to ventilate on this Nigeria-China.
Thank you, sir. We're enjoying your paper. That's why we could not stop you, sir.
Thank you very much. I hope you heard me through.
Yes, sir. We are doing
because
very
the internet is behave. Yes. The internet behave well.
Thank you, sir.
Very much, my dean.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, that was Professor Ali. That was a wonderful paper. He gave us a paper on Nigeria, Russia, and Eastern Europe. So, Professor Stelobi, please, you have the floor, sir.
Well, good morning, distinguished colleagues,
you,
ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cyril Obi, and I work for the Social Science Research Council in New York. I want to join others in thanking the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs for putting together this very important roundtable. I also want to congratulate the Director General and his team for the organization, and I'm very happy to see colleagues from over the years and to see that our culture of research, policy engagement, and the quest for excellence is alive and well. My work today, my responsibility is to speak to Nigeria and OPEC relations. There is a sense in which this paper relates to a lot of the presentations that have been made earlier. So permit me to start by saying that this year marks Nigeria's Golden Jubilee anniversary as a member of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which it joined at the peak of the organization's influence over the oil market in the 1970s. Barely 1 year after the end of the Nigerian Civil War, the Nigerian government, on the advice of some oil technocrats and top-level civil servants, and a recognition of the growing profile of oil as the new economic mainstay of the country, joined OPEC on July 12, 1971. A move that turned out to be most strategic when international oil prices more than quadrupled as a result of the global oil crisis of OPEC's oil revolution, or the first global oil shock following the organization's embargo on Western countries supporting Israel in its war against Arab states. Nigeria's membership of OPEC meant that the country benefited from the oil boom that followed the rise in the price of oil exports, providing the country with huge foreign exchange earnings and national revenues, which in turn translated into immense federal power, rapid economic expansion, and the pursuit of a vibrant foreign policy in Africa and beyond. Since the 1970s, oil has emerged as a critical factor in the shaping of Nigeria's national interest due to its economic, strategic, and geopolitical values. Not only has Nigeria's economic fortunes become wholly dependent on oil production and exports, oil has also remained central to the country's foreign policy, with OPEC as one of the most important sites and targets of its oil diplomacy. The importance of Nigeria-OPEC relations has not been lost to scholars of Nigeria's foreign policy. According to Shuremekun, oil has remained a crucial element in defining national power and the robust regional and Pan-Africanist thrust in Nigeria's foreign policy. In relation to Nigeria-OPEC relations, therefore, we would need this paper will focus more attention, not just on Nigeria's economic dependence on oil, but would also look at the extent to which oil has shaped foreign policy and its implications for our national development. The paper partly explains that Nigeria's oil clout in the 1970s and 1980s shaped the country's policy and its emergence on the global stage as an African power. However, by the mid-1980s, following the fall in international prices, which contributed to a national economic recession, and the adoption of an IMF World Bank Economic Reform Package, which is also called SAP, or the Structural Adjustment Program, Nigeria embraced economic diplomacy, which was a departure from its oil-buoyed activist diplomacy of the previous decade. The fall in global oil prices also fed into debates about Nigeria's oil diplomacy and, by extension, the country's relations with OPEC. While some argued that Nigeria should quit OPEC to enable it free itself from the constraints of oil quotas, as well as the influence of Arab Middle East countries, others said that Nigeria should remain in OPEC. However, we should note that Nigeria is arguably a relatively small player by virtue of its rather small size. It's the 8th largest OPEC oil producer with about 3.1% of its oil reserves, vis-a-vis OPEC powerhouses in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, the 2nd largest with 22.4%, Iran, the 3rd largest with 13.1%, and Iraq, the 4th largest with 12.2%. However, I argue that Nigeria has punched above its weight, both in terms of the benefits of membership of the organization, as well as the strategic leadership positions its citizens have occupied and still occupy in OPEC. However, it should be recognized that from a structuralist perspective, the country has been more of a follower than a leader of OPEC. The fundamental question after 50 years of engagement is how best can Nigeria-OPEC relations serve Nigeria's interests in the context of emerging challenges facing the organization as well as the country against the background of some of the changes in the global market, climate change, and an imminent global energy transition. It is against this background that this paper critically examines Nigeria-OPEC relations in the past 50 years and the prospects for Nigeria's foreign policy and national development. It approaches this issue against the background of OPEC's history, emerging challenges against the background of the global oil market, against the background of recent changes in the global oil market, including the impact of COVID-19 on Nigeria-OPEC relations, and the political economy and geopolitics of Nigeria's oil. In conclusion, the paper will examine the prospects for Nigeria-OPEC relations for foreign policy and national development. The rest of this paper looks at OPEC, both in terms of its history and its challenges, noting that OPEC was established in 1960, and that at that time, those countries were really very concerned about the need to control their oil reserves and to use their oil endowment for national development or in pursuit of their national interests. At that time, oil reserves were largely dominated by a group of multinational oil corporations called the Seven Sisters. And the Seven Sisters did a lot of havoc, really, in terms of the way they plundered the resources of these countries. So OPEC, you could argue, became an organization of the global South's oil producers, where providentially most of the world's oil reserves were located. They decided to practice what I call petro-nationalism. That is, nationalism that is driven by the recognition or the desire to control one of the world's most strategic and highly valued resources. It was also driven by global Southern solidarity, in which these countries believed that the best way they could regulate their oil endowment and secure fair and stable prices for petroleum producers was to come together. And fortunately for OPEC, the world became increasingly dependent on oil. And the Seven Sisters did not have that much influence as a result of politics of OPEC. However, you would also understand that due to the geopolitics of OPEC itself, most of its most dominant and powerful members were in the Middle East. So it was just a question of time before OPEC became engaged in Middle East politics. And that contributed to the first oil shock, when OPEC placed an embargo on oil supplies to the West because of its support for Israel. Basically, what that did was that because of the huge demand for oil and because of the embargo, the prices of oil quadrupled. And in many cases, between 1973 to 1976, the price of oil increased by at least between 4 to 10 times. This was the time that Nigeria joined OPEC in 1971. So Nigeria joined OPEC at the right time in order to reap the benefits of a huge windfall. But you do understand that there are phases in the lives of organizations and phases in the lives of in social phenomena. And therefore, the golden age of OPEC began to wane somewhat. While you could say that the years between 1960 and 1980 were years in which OPEC was able to challenge the West geopolitically because of its dominance of oil, between 1980 and 2000, you will begin to see certain changes affecting both the global oil markets as well as OPEC's influence. One of the things that has always been mentioned is that by 1993, China could no longer produce its own oil and became an oil importing country and accounted for a huge demand of oil. Interestingly also, it was also a period during which there was war in Iraq and Iran. Sanctions were imposed on Iran, and eventually later on, as you would discover, there was also the whole question of how Western countries reacted to what they considered to be OPEC's dominance of global oil markets. They did this through several ways. One, they started to diversify the sources of their supplies away from OPEC countries, even though this was not very successful. They also began to explore other alternative sources of energy, particularly against the rising debates around climate change and carbon emissions. And thirdly, they invested in efficient and cheaper technologies that will consume less amounts of oil. Between 2008, the situation has been a bit more complicated, as you would see. While you had a situation in which OPEC continued to use its clout was somewhat diminished. What you would discover was that several things happened, but because of the constraints of time, what I will simply say is that OPEC, in order to be able to keep to its original mandate of ensuring stability in the prices of oil and maximizing benefits from oil, has had to collaborate with non-OPEC countries, particularly Russia. Incidentally, Professor Lee spoke about Russia. Russia and Saudi Arabia basically dominate global oil supplies. And the shale revolution in the United States has even complicated matters, because the United States, because of the shale revolution that took place, had transformed itself from a net importer of oil to actually becoming a big producer of oil itself. And this itself had implications for the global oil market. Now, what we see now is a situation in which OPEC has now transformed really into OPEC Plus. where it has formed an alliance with other countries. And this is not an accident, because what happened in 2020 was that Russia and Saudi Arabia waged a price war and flooded the market, and this war led to the flooding of the market. And for the first time in the history of the world, oil fell to its lowest prices, even in negative terms. And this brought the lesson home that for OPEC to survive, it will have to collaborate. And interestingly, even though Nigeria is not physically located in the Arab world, Nigeria has played a key role in the diplomacy of trying to stabilize the prices of oil by not just accepting cuts in oil production quotas, but actually leading shuttle diplomacy with other African oil producers to ensure that there is a consensus around cutting back oil in order to shore up global oil prices. And you will discover that without going into too much details, COVID had a disastrous impact on the global oil markets, and it posed really new challenges to OPEC and Nigeria. So what does this mean for Nigeria? This paper looks into this by looking at the geopolitics as well as the political economy of oil in Nigeria. My main argument here is that while Nigeria has done well in terms of its diplomacy within OPEC, Nigeria has produced presidents of OPEC conferences. It has produced 4 secretaries general of OPEC. But there is a disconnect between the diplomacy of Nigeria in the global arena through OPEC and the performance of Nigeria's oil industry. In terms of its political economy, Nigeria still depends on the technology of foreign companies to produce oil, and the bulk of its oils is still produced by oil multinationals. Nigeria's oil corporation is nowhere near its competitors, even though the geography or the influence architecture of global oil has changed. Multinationals no longer really dominate the global oil production statistics. Actually, now you have a mix of maybe 2 multinationals and about 8 state oil corporations that have become giants. You cannot count Nigeria's oil corporation among any of the giants of the global stage. So here we have a structural problem in terms of political economy, where Nigeria's oil industry remains dependent, remains stunted in terms of its growth, and yet Nigeria has this glorious policy and oil diplomacy towards OPEC. The other dimension of what I look into is the geopolitics of oil within Nigeria. I think the history of the crisis in the Niger Delta, as well as the struggle for resource control and restructuring, and the way this relates to the control and distribution of oil within Nigeria tells a big story. The implication of this is that it has bred instability, and Nigeria has remained captured to the fluctuations of global oil prices without the capacity to absorb shocks that come periodically from time to time. So basically, at the end of the day, the question then is, how can a country that is doing well in terms of its OPEC diplomacy be able to actually sustain anything if the economic foundations of its oil endowment remain embedded in deep structural and periodic crisis? I then argue in my conclusion that we could look at this in 2 ways: from an optimistic reading of OPEC's prospects or a pessimistic reading of OPEC's prospects, and along with it, Nigeria as a follower. So I then try to conclude. I don't know how much time I have, but I will.
1 minute, sir, 1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute. Oh, that's very generous of you. I will try to round up within one.
Very generous person.
1 minute. An optimistic reading of OPEC's prospects suggests that oil and gas will remain prized resources for the foreseeable future, and that in spite of challenges such as it faces, basically these challenges will look at the ways in which the search for cleaner technologies and sources of energy have really dominated global discussions. We look at the whole question of rules for zero carbon emissions, and we also look at the threats posed by the fragility of the alliance around production costs. You can see that OPEC really faces challenges, but OPEC leaders are optimistic that OPEC will ride the storm and will be able to use consensus to stabilize oil prices. On the other hand, the pessimists are saying that oil, the percentage of oil in the global energy mix is reducing. And with this will reduce OPEC's influence. And I argue that Nigeria is somewhere caught between the optimists and the pessimists. But a lot will depend on Nigeria's capacity to transform its domestic economy away from its monocultural pivot. So many administrations have promised that they will diversify the Nigerian economy. But so far, this is still an aspiration rather than a fact. Ultimately, for me, my argument would then be that in terms of considering diversification, Nigeria will have to emphasize the short term and the long term. In the short term, it will have to diversify what you will call the linkages between the forward and backward linkages between oil and other sectors of the economy. It would also need to shift its geopolitics in terms of the very destructive struggles around controlling oil among the various political actors in Nigeria. And ultimately, it will have to rethink and reconnect oil politics to equal citizenship, driven by the knowledge that time is fast running out on a non-renewable asset. For Nigeria's oil diplomacy and foreign policy towards OPEC to be effective, it will both have to respond to the ongoing changes in the global context, as well as respond to the country's domestic challenges. In this regard, Nigeria would have to connect its domestic to its foreign policy by laying the foundation for, or indeed preparing for a post-carbon future based on a socially, economically inclusive, just and equitable principles of sustainable development. I thank you for your patience, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That was very interesting. We appreciate your contribution, sir. That was Professor Sirilobi. I spoke on Nigeria and OPEC. Now we are going to the last paper for the day, and we hope this one will be shorter than the earlier one. The paper is titled Nigeria and the Emerging Economies, China and India. Dr. FM that will give this is the acting director of research and studies. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Our moderator for today, or for this afternoon session. I'll start by saying I really appreciate all the professors who are here. I know I've actually stressed you these few days, and I sent my notes at about 2 a.m. Nigerian time, 1 a.m., 3 a.m. We really appreciate it that we're able to make it to this roundtable. People say I look like Chinese these days, I don't know why. And maybe after eating a lot of noodles and spring onions and the rest, I became like them. I'm asked to make a presentation on Nigeria and the emerging economies, China and India. Frankly speaking, the last speakers have really touched on the issues of relating to emerging economies. And even those that actually touched on the developed economies, I've also took note of a whole lot of factors which CAS not taking. Our relationship with the emerging economies will also go the same way. I started my presentation, or I will start by a quote. And this quote is, the striking thing about the global economy is how little it relies on the US as the main engine of growth. Since 2007, China's rapidly expanding economy has provided the largest contribution to global growth, while half of the world's expansion over the past year has come from 3 countries: China, India, and Russia. I think this is exactly what we see and what the global economy has become. The emerging economies are playing an increasing significant role, not just in Africa, but across the developing world, across the international system. These emerging economies have potential important implications for the future of global economic governance and Africa's development as a whole. While these economies are set to deepen their impact upon political, economic, and security dynamics across the continent in the coming years, their lasting impact on the evolving international economic order cannot be comprehended. And this we have seen what the Chinese, the Indians, the Russians are actually doing. Professor Lee made a statement concerning the Sochi meeting, and I think when that meeting held, I wrote a paper, a column in Financial Nigeria, which I titled the One Country, One Continent Summit. You see, all these emerging economies today are coming to Africa. They are holding summits with Africa, where all African head of states will line up and be shaking hands with one president. And I think my argument was that that is not supposed to be. And because we are at best recipients of this advanced economy, and that should be part of what our foreign policy should change. I look at the definition of emerging economies, which I defined as the economy of a developing nation that is becoming more engaged with global market as it grows. Emerging economies are those transitioning from a low-income, less developed, often pre-industrial economy towards a modern industrial economy with a higher standard of living. In other words, countries classified as emerging economies are those with some, but not all, of the characteristics of a developed market. It is characterized by increased liquidity in local debt and equity markets, increased trade volume, foreign direct investment, and the domestic development of modern financial and regulatory institutions. Now, aside China and India, which is the countries I'm focusing on, some notable emerging economies also include Mexico, Russia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil. Aside this categorization, there's also the MINT countries, which are also looked at as emerging economies, and some of them looked at as a frontier market. There's also the VISTA, which also involves Venezuela, Thailand is there, Argentina is there. Now, but the argument is China sees itself as a developing world. And when you discuss with the Chinese, they see themselves as an emerging economy. But to some other persons who are not Chinese, they see China as a developed country. And this is not far from the truth, because if you have been to China and you have been to other parts of the world, there's no difference between China and those countries, those developed our advanced economies. And we should also understand that China, there are only 2 global countries with 2 global reach, which is the United States and China right now. I don't think India has that kind of reach, but although it's an emerging economy. But in the truest sense, can we say these economies are actually emerging? Maybe, for instance, China, which is one of our focus. India, we can understand. Now, I would not want to go into the elementary definition of foreign policy, which is actually supposed to be the actions or inactions of states. But you see, in 1970s, Professor Cyril just talked about the OPEC countries. During the oil glut, I think the United States realized that economic issues have also gained primacy as much as military issues. And that was when economics became a core of US national interest. And I think that is not what a lot of countries, especially in Africa, have taken into consideration. And in Nigeria, I would say that Nigeria, we have not taken economic issues as core of our foreign policy. And until we begin to see economics as core of our foreign policy, we will not get anywhere. Because the whole idea of the actions or inactions, whether state or non-state actors, is to gain resources that you don't have enough at home, or to gain resources that you don't even have. And so I think in that sense, we should begin to take into consideration our relationship with the emerging economies seriously and in a different light. Now, if you look at our foreign policy objective, I think one aspect that actually will take into consideration my discourse is the promotion of a just world economic order. Now, there are two important factors I want to raise here. Our relationship with the existing emerging economies is not just because we want them to help us develop, but again, because we have to align together under what is called the collectivization, which is the groupings of developing countries coming together to fight for equity. I think last week or 2 weeks ago, I was presenting a lecture on the asymmetric relations between Nigeria and China. And there's this constant that I put forward that asymmetry in the international system is a constant. But what is also a constant is that whenever we discuss our relationship with the developed world, we are quick to complain that our problem is caused by the advanced or the developed world or the advanced economies, and which is not right, and which other speakers have already said that our problem here is innate, is endogenous, it's not really, as we often put forward, exogenous. Now, in the discourse of state relations, it is difficult to divorce economics from politics, and in the same vein, it is somewhat difficult to disassociate a nation's foreign policy from its economic development. This is because, like I said, subject of the sustenance of economic prosperity have also become matters of core national interest. In that sense, the economic rise of Asia's giants is the most important story of our age. It heralds the end in the not so distant future of as much as 5 centuries of domination by the Europeans and their colonial offshoots. Now, I looked at relationship between China and Nigeria, India and Nigeria, in terms of our engagement, precisely economic engagement and trade. India-Nigeria relations started in 1958, when India actually established its diplomatic house in Lagos. India is Nigeria's largest trading partner, and Nigeria is India's largest trading partner in Africa. Bilateral trade between Nigeria and India, as at 2019-2020, was 82 billion, as against 13.89 billion recorded during the year 2018-2019. India is also the largest buyer of Nigerian crude oil. Of the total Indian imports of 10.21 billion from Nigeria, crude oil accounted for 10.03%. Now, when you place that side by side with China, China buys only about 2 to 5% of Nigerian oil. But in any case, when it comes to other trade engagement, China has more trade engagement in other resources with Nigeria than India. Now, in Nigeria alone, we have over 135 million companies. It's estimated that there will be around 19.3 billion of investment by Indian companies in Nigeria, according to the High Commissioner, who was here some few weeks ago. Now, For China, I think our strategic document that we signed, the strategic partnership is of immense importance here, which also talked about increasing trade, investment in agriculture, telecommunication, energy, and infrastructural development. But in terms of hierarchy, in that MOU that we signed, economics, science and tech, and infrastructural development takes preeminence. This is because the Chinese understand that the weakness in these three areas are part of the reason why the developing countries are underdeveloped and find themselves in the economic situation today. Now, but our trade with China, as at 2020 was 18 million, as at 2019 it was 19.27 billion. We can understand that the 13 billion in 2020 was because of the ravage of COVID-19 pandemic. Now, if you look at our trade with China and India, they are all commodities: mineral fuels, oil, distillation product, oil seeds, grain, fruits, animal, vegetable fats, and all that. Now, our relationship in terms of the trade between these two countries are basically commodities. And that is why in recent times, the argument has been that there is trade imbalance between us and these countries, between Nigeria and China, and between Nigeria and India. Except we move away from commodity, we can never be of equal terms, or we can never gain equality in terms of trade. And unless we become industrialized, we can never move from where we are. Now, the three important considerations should be noted in this relationship: free flow of trade, investment, capital, and national currencies across national borders has created such a high level of economic interdependence among nations, such that it will be fallacious to discuss national economies in a singular sense. And so this is basically what our trade is with these two countries. What we should also note is that the emergence of these new actors, especially China and India, and other emerging economies with growing economic and political powers, are bringing to bear the reconfiguration of global politics and economics. And three, new challenges such as climate change, insecurity, terrorism, cybersecurity, outbreak of major epidemics, and natural disasters has brought to the forefront, which is also saying that it is beyond the ability of individual countries to find solutions to or to solve through state relations. And so we need to relate with one another through either the continental organization or the multilateral organization. And so this is a very important consideration that is actually boosting our relationship, or should boost our relationship with other countries. In that sense, Nigeria must have to attach itself to emerging economies of China and India. Now, how should Nigeria harness this relationship? First, I argue that development cannot be overcome without qualitative change, which is what every other speaker have mentioned and talked about in the internal structures of many developing countries, especially ours, which is the focus of our roundtable. We cannot be what we want to be, except there is qualitative change in governance and in leadership and in the way we think about Nigeria and in the way we see ourselves. Secondly, there is an urgent need for Nigeria to formulate true development plans that will provide for maximum mobilization of domestic resources and effective utilization of external assistance. These plans must be development, effective, and focused on the poor. Now, the third point is it will be difficult for Nigeria to achieve sustained self-development or compete evenly in global economies without advancement in science and technology. We heard that yesterday when Professor Sita talked about that. The emerging role of science and technology in the industrial development sector cannot be overemphasized. If a country must pursue growth through the export of finished goods, it must rely on research and development. Now, the fourth point is fifth or so, A key component of development is a recognition of the importance of international trade and finance for improving growth and per capita income. International trade is a source of demand and a channel for earning the bulk of a much needed foreign exchange. Now, when I talk about international trade, I'm not talking about the consumables. I'm not talking about commodities, which we find ourselves selling. I think we should move beyond that. We should add value to our produce or our product, what we sell out. And except we do that, we continue to lag behind. Hence, we should encourage more trade with China and India in that sense, but not just commodity trade. It is important that the trade moves to value-added goods and not commodity as usual. One thing our foreign policy should harness from our relationship with China and India, we need to understudy their model of development. It is not only engaging them in terms of trade, in terms of having access to their money or aid, but we should study their development model. Importantly, we should adopt and adapt with peculiarities to our society, you know, the ones that fit into our social structural dynamics, not just adopt and then implement as it is, you know, and except if we do that, we might be heading towards failure. My conclusion is that Nigeria's foreign policy, or for Nigeria's foreign policy to achieve economic growth and development, there is need to go beyond rhetoric and diplomatic meetings. I've also argued consistently, we don't really have a policy of engagement. And if we don't have a policy of engagement, you cannot engage these people. You know, Nigeria's foreign policy, I mean, in terms of our engagement with whether the developed or the other emerging economies, I have never seen a document. I keep saying this, I have not seen a document like Nigeria's policy towards China, Nigeria's policy towards India. I've never seen, but you see, all these countries have a policy. For instance, the Chinese have the China-Africa policy. Indians have the same thing. UK has the same thing. The US-Africa's policy is there. And so in all their engagement, they rely on that policy paper. I think this is what we should begin to do. If we have to move further, we have to be the giant of Africa that we claim to be. And I've argued again, which is sometimes, you know, for me, I think it's a bit not realistic. How can a low-income country under stress be a power or be a giant in the continent? Anyway, with particular reference to my case studies, which is China, India, I would also like to conclude that for a win-win solution, it lies ultimately with Nigeria, although not without commitments from China and India. Now, I think I want us to go home finally with this, that all the commitments, all the MOUs we signed, all the meetings, the summit meetings we have attended with these countries, there are a lot of promises. I think it is high time that the Africans, you know, African governments, Nigerian government, hold them by their words. For instance, if you look at the focal plan of action, there's an aspect that talked about training scientists. There's an aspect that talked about knowledge sharing. There are other aspects that talked about building model farms, you know, for Africa, you know, and all that. I think we should hold them by their promises for us to learn and see what they are doing. Today, these two countries that we are talking about have been able to move most of their population, a large portion of their population away from poverty. I think with that, I rest my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you for raising your case at this time. Yes, Professor Silubi mentioned that Nigeria needs to re-engage OPEC and diversify truly, not just by mere lips. And Professor Ali also talked about engaging Russia. It's the same thing that has come out in this paper, that Nigeria should engage China and India constructively, and we should have policies towards this country so that we know what we want in the relationship. We don't just go into a relationship that is not beneficial or you are not getting any benefits from it. It should be a win-win relationship, not that one side will be gaining more. I remember Professor Ali also mentioning, of course, one person will gain, the other one, even if the other person will gain, the other one will gain more than the other person. So we want to be gaining, not that one person will be gaining more than the other. So to this end, this concludes all the presentations since yesterday, and what we now have now, just in the next 15-20 minutes is discussions. We need to discuss, and if there are comments or questions, we can be able to just look at it within the next 15-20 minutes. So questions, comments are welcome, both from the floor here and from the platform too. Okay, Professor Ali, sir, you have the floor, sir. You can unmute yourself. Unmute, then you have the floor, sir.
Okay, I should, okay, I've unmuted myself. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
I want to thank Professor Cyril.
Okay, sir.
I find the paper of Professor Obi quite interesting. But I have this unhappy feeling that he reduced our participation in OPEC to the number of posts we have enjoyed in OPEC. This is one of the greatest dilemma of Nigeria. Our national interest is subsumed under the ambition of individuals without any critical focus on the benefit for the country. For a starter, how many oil-producing countries in OPEC allocate oil wells to individuals? It's only Nigeria that allocates oil wells. Instead of the state accumulating, it is officials of state and their friends that are accumulating on behalf of the state. You give oil wells to individuals, they now have billions in their account, they are not doing anything, just wasting our national resources. And then we say, oh, we are in OPEC, we are activists, we have been there, we have 3 presidents, we have 3 secretary general of OPEC. What has that done to our very critical sector of the national economy? And one more point, look at the way we manage the oil sector. Nigeria cannot manage oil refinery. Instead, Nigeria now abdicated the responsibility of refining its crude for national consumption and allow an individual to now be the producer of refined products for us. So Professor Obi and maybe all of us colleagues should be looking at this. This is what we are talking about when we are talking about poor governance, ineffective governance, failed governance. It is this kind of self-interested approach to national policy, national interest that derailed us on the international arena. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your comments. Any other? Somebody is raising up his hand. Yeah, no, on the platform. Look at that hand down.
That will be Professor Ali's.
Okay.
That will be Professor Ali's hand.
Okay, it's Professor Ali's hand. Okay, sir. Okay.
Well, I don't know if I should respond now or if I should wait.
Okay, sorry, before you respond, there's a question here. Somebody is asking that how to understand the goals of US, China, Russia, India, and EU's engagement with Nigeria. Is there any difference among them? Thank you. I think the floor is this is the question for everybody.
Yes, the question for everyone, maybe Professor Ali, Professor Adetula, Professor Cyril. Everybody, sir, including Professor Paoli, sir. Answer, sir.
Who do you want to answer?
You can answer, sir, the question that said, what does Russia, US, all of them want in Africa? That are they different from each other or one another? So you may answer, Professor Cyril Obi can add, Professor Adetula can add, Professor Paoli can also put. Okay, all the professors should professor.
No. Well, I hope Professor Obi will have the chance to answer my question. But on this matter, all the countries are looking after their interests. Where they stand, if you understand the dynamics of their national situation, you will even be able to understand what each group is looking for. Look at Britain, look at UK. UK left Europe and is fishing all over the world looking for Commonwealth countries that the UK will now be the whipping boy of UK. After leaving the comfort of European Union, bastardizing, abusing everybody, saying they are cheating them now, they are in soup and they are coming to Africa, going around Commonwealth countries, trying to look for market, saying they are looking. How can you leave a multilateral market and come and be looking for us because they think we in Africa, especially Nigeria, we are disorganized, so they can come and tell us some monkey stories and we will open our market wide for British investment, for British facilities and services. As I was talking about Russia, that many scholars have tried to look at what, in fact, somebody posed the question, what is Russia looking for in Africa? And the conclusion was that Russia was not particularly looking for markets. Russia was looking for military alliances, for, well, market for military hardware, opportunity for the establishment of military bases, signing of military agreements, because that is what concerns Russia. As far as China is concerned, I think our Chinese brother, UBFM, can explain what his people want. He said they call him Chinese. So he can tell us, and I think the Chinese are obvious. The Chinese have been very strategic, you know. They didn't come here making noise. They came here carrying flowers, bringing dollars, bringing yuan, and giving us loan at very good rates, investing in infrastructure in which we are deficit. And before we know it, we embrace them, isn't it? And all Africa embrace them, not only Nigeria. So Nigeria is a big market, it's a good opportunity for Chinese. If you look at, you know, the Japanese also have TICAD, which is the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD. And everybody is looking for access to one thing or the other. Most importantly, our raw materials. Most importantly, our raw materials. Russia is almost self-sufficient. Russia is a very, very rich. Siberia, as you see, Russia is very rich. Hydrocarbon, gas, everything. They are not looking for that kind of raw material, but they are a major arm producing nation. So they want to be able to sell arms to African countries. I think I should allow my other colleagues.
Professor Cyril, please. Professor Cyril Obi.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Ali, thank you so much for your intervention. What I did was to describe the nature of Nigeria's engagement with OPEC and what it had done. But I did also mention that there is a mismatch or a gap between the beautiful diplomacy in terms of the kind of appointments we have made. I also clearly explained that Nigeria was able to ride on the back of the OPEC price revolution. Now, these are two significant things. But I did mention that the domestic base of that engagement is weak, and I underlined the structural weaknesses of Nigeria's positioning in the global political economy, its dependence on foreign oil multinationals and so on and so forth. So your point is right, but the domestic base of that engagement is very weak, and that is what you have alluded to. I'm sorry if I did not emphasize that enough, but it's there in my paper. And really, for Nigeria to make sense of its oil endowment, charity must begin at home. And it doesn't matter what kind of external engagements and beautiful appointments that we're able to make. Ultimately, oil has to be transformed into a veritable tool and platform for Nigeria's national interest and greatness. So the point is well taken, Prof. I recognize the contradictions in Nigeria's domestic realities. It's also, if you look at the paper, I even went ahead to talk about the kind of alternatives that our policymakers are thinking of to make up for the gaps between the quota that is being imposed on Nigeria by OPEC, to say we will now start to produce more condensate. We will now try to produce more gas for export. I also looked at that in my paper. And my argument really is that Nigeria should actually think of two things: backward and forward linkages between its domestic oil sectors. And that, of course, would include the whole question of refining, refineries, and the paradox that an oil producer, the largest in Africa, is also a net importer of refined products, when actually we should be the one producing appropriately priced refined products, both for regional and global markets. But that's a different story. Let me go to the second question. What do the US, Russia, the EU, and China want from Nigeria? And I will just say there are 4 things to consider. The first will be markets. The second will be raw materials. The third will be geostrategic and security interests. And the fourth will be influence. Fundamentally, what countries need from each other, and these 4 or 5 groupings and countries want from Nigeria or Africa, would be fundamentally the same. What will be different will be the approach. But the message I want to leave with you is that you will have to develop your own system. If you don't develop your own system and defend your own interests, others will organize to take over your own system and subordinate your interests to theirs. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Professor Adetula, sir.
Yes, please.
Please say something, sir.
You want me to say something?
Yes, sir. Because there was a question that what does EU want in Africa or in Nigeria?
I will start from the general and I will now go to specific. HD's last word, trinity of political goals. And I think that connects with what Professor Cyril Obi has just spoke about. Trinity of political goals, deference, which is respect and influence, security as the defense, and prosperity. So either you are small or you are big, either you are super or medium. You go into the international system, advance your values and interests based on these 3. So that suggests that at different level, it becomes economic. At another level, it is about influence. But you discovered, like somebody said during the plenary, that the interconnectedness of this really matters. So, but now specifically in the case of EU, where I presented my reflections, is historical. What EU, if you like, which is a very good name for Europe, what Europe wants in Nigeria is historical. And it's also connected with our history, geography, and geopolitical interests. Markets, if you like, but how dominant is the issue of markets? today, there are BRICS. There are other people that also want Nigerian market. The geopolitical interests. The European Union want to have Nigeria at any point in time, even if it is not meeting up with its economic interests. When Nigeria will talk at African Union, you know how much that is. Why European Union decide to aid Nigeria with respect to its COVID-19 response? Why not Niger? Why not Benin? So these are issues that require us to reflect. But like other speakers have said, I think let us think about what Nigeria wants from this relationship. I think that will help us better. Yesterday, I spoke briefly after Darren Q spoke about how America wants us to play a regional role. I say, what does Nigeria get from this? Foreign policy, 21st century, is not exclusively about altruism. It's about enlightening self-interest. Professor Bolaji Akinyemi is still very much around for us to learn from his thinking about when the chips are really down, what do you gain from foreign policy actions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Obi, Professor Obi Emekwe.
Thank you. Thank you. It's not professor, it's like just Mr. Obi Emekwe.
Okay, Mr. Obi Emekwe, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Obi Emekwe. I am president of Del Reef Consult. I was a staff member of the United Nations and I work for Afrexim Bank. So that's my work introduction. I want to congratulate you on organizing a very interesting session for this event. And my comment is really more on the organizers in terms of now that we've had this very important discussion, how do you take it forward? You know, in Nigeria, we have this tendency to discuss and put forward very good ideas, you know, but it doesn't get into implementation. So how do you convert this discussion into something that's implementable by the government level? How does it get to them? That's my question to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Do you have any question from the floor before I give the professors to answer Mr. Obi's question? Deputy Chief Rapporteur, you want to ask us? Go ahead.
Thank you. Please, my question is for Professor Kamilu Fage. Actually, he made a very good presentation, but I would like to have his recommendation, his policy on his topic, Nigerian foreign policy and insecurity in Sahel.
Oh, Professor Fage, it was a question for you, sir. Did you hear the question? Professor Fage, Professor Kamilu Fage, you can unmute yourself. That was a question for you. Okay, sir. Is there any of our professors that also, okay, Professor Fage is here. Professor Kamilu Fage, that was a question for you, sir.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
Hello?
Hello, sir.
Hello?
Hello, sir. We can hear you, sir. We can hear you, sir.
What is the question?
They said they want 1 or 2 policy recommendations from your paper, sir.
Okay, from my paper.
Yes, sir.
A major recommendation that I will make is that given the complexity of the issue that I talk about, the issue of security, the issue of various challenges that arose from our interaction with our neighbors, and especially the issues that come from our borders. My major recommendation is that Nigeria should strengthen the issue of multilateralism. For example, issues like Boko Haram, like banditry and other things, I think that we cannot go along in resolving them. So we have to, by way of that, we have to cooperate with our neighbors. And in doing that, we should try to make it indigenous African as possible. We shouldn't wait until foreign powers like France call us to come and discuss issues, because they have their own interests and they do not know our problem more than us, and they don't love us more than ourselves. So I think we should encourage that multilateral cooperation. And secondly, as we are doing that, I think Nigeria should take the bull by the horn. Most of the issues that we talk from independence today, objectives have remained consistent, but the issue is that of implementation. We should go beyond rhetoric and try to implement issues that really affect us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Prof. Prof said we should mobilize our internal resources in fighting insurgency instead of relying more on foreign powers like France, who don't know our terrain more than ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, and our dear distinguished teachers and professors.
I've not asked my question. My hand has been on.
Can I? Okay.
Can I ask my question?
Professor,
yes.
Okay, sir, you have
Please, sorry, I'm very sorry. My hand. Yeah. I just wanted to ask the man that spoke after Professor Ali. I think the man that spoke about on India and China, about what he thinks about countries having forum with the whole Africa. I can understand US Africa Forum. I can understand EU Africa Forum. I can, to a very large extent, understand China Africa Forum. I cannot understand Vietnam Africa Forum. I cannot understand Thailand Africa Forum. Why bunch discuss with the whole Africa as if we are one? The interest of Nigeria in China is different, is probably different from the interest of Ghana in China. And the interest of Ghana in China is probably different from other interests. Why bunch all of us together? When that question was asked some time ago in a different forum, I understand that it was done by AU in order to help the smaller African countries that cannot discuss directly with big countries like China. But not Vietnam. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, with your kind permission, can I say a word?
Yes, go ahead with the words, Prof.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Yes,
this is only a suggestion. Between May this year and, from May to the present, I've had the privilege of giving lectures at the National Institute for Security Studies in Abuja, National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies in Kuru, and now taking part in this conference. And all these three institutions have something to do with all the themes for all their annual participant courses. And this conference all have to do with Nigeria's foreign policy. And I'm thinking that it is possible that these various institutions are working independently of each other, if not at cross purposes. I think there should be on a major issue like Nigeria's foreign policy going forward, there should be a synergy between the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, the National Institute for Security Studies, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and other relevant stakeholders, so that a comprehensive agenda can be prepared for Nigeria's foreign policy and given to government. I think the NIA, because I'm making the suggestion on the platform, the NIA is perhaps in a position to create this kind of synergy, so that the NIA does not just have its own conference and volumes will come out of it, needs to have its own conference and volumes will come out of it, and it's difficult to synthesize all this. I think some form of synthesis on a major issue like redrafting Nigeria's foreign policy going forward is very important. Thank you, Chairman, for this privilege to say a word.
Thank you, Professor Fawole. Thank you so much. Professor Adetula, you raise up your hand. Please, you can speak, sir.
Thank you. Maybe I should start with what my Oga said, Professor Fawole. As he was speaking, something came to my mind about the Oransoye report. And I keep wondering if we have seen the end of multiplication and duplication of responsibility. But that discussion is for another day. I said something at the beginning of my brief presentation that there is need to go beyond this, our individual reflection, for us to make some effort at doing some research around it, so that it becomes more nuanced, some of the issues. I think that's very, very important. Yesterday, I had one of the chair talk about the desire to consolidate this into publication form.
Thank you. I think he's muted.
I'm muted. I was talking about what I said about driving this process through some research beyond just personal reflection. After I made reference to Oronsoye reports, and that we should go beyond this publication. But I have a word, if Chairman will allow me, on this.
You're muted. Are you still muted? You're muted. Sir, unmute yourself.
I'm not the one doing it, too.
Who is doing it? Mike.
You see my hand around my chin.
Yes, sir. Please repeat that statement, sir.
Well, I started by making reference to Oronsoye report that as my Oga Fawole was talking,
yes, we go down.
It came to my mind that, look, Oronsoye report should have helped us to adjust some of these duplication and multiplication of responsibility. But that is not to play down the need for us to harmonize some of these thoughts. But I feel we need to do more research beyond this individual reflection, so that we can nuance some of the opinion beyond what we see from our narrow corners and perspective. But having said that, the question about clustering African countries together to come and listen to either Libya or Vietnam or India, I think African country can choose either to be there or not to be there. When it started and we were all going around, of course, every other smaller country now feel that, oh, it is when you cluster them together that they listen to you. So it is for African countries themselves to take that position. Individual countries like Nigeria should take the lead. I remember that when Nigeria was not invited to one of these plurilateral platforms, is it G8 or G7? Yes, there was all lie about it, that, oh, why was Nigeria not brought there? That means we are not among the prestigious countries. And why not be prestigious to your citizens first, before you start thinking about being prestigious to others? I think the responsibility as to which meeting you attend or what platform you choose to advance your national interest belongs to that country. So the star is in ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. God bless you, sir. So we are concluding now.
Thank you. Thank you, professors. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the council, the management, and staff of NI, we wish to say thank you to all the professors and colleagues from other institute and university and participants. Let me thank all, I think I have all my teachers here, and I have my senior colleagues, Professor Cyril Obi, Professor Adetula, Professor Ali, who is also our council member, Professor Shedrack Best, Professor Pamsha. These were all my teachers. Thank you so much for being part of this meeting. We have come to the end of the program. I will still send emails to you today to get more details from you. I will put in the information I need from you in the email. On behalf of NIA, once again, I say thank you so much. Please, anytime we call you, just accept and be part of whatever we are doing. NIA needs to come back to its repute. So we need everybody on board. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, great day to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Hello.
Everybody should greet. Let everybody greet everybody. What you why in a hurry? Yes, I've seen.
Hello, Professor B.
Professor Cyril, thank you.
How you doing?
We thank God. Nice to hear you.
Very well. How are you? Okay.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch.
Take care. Professor Paole, big brother, Professor Ali. My greetings.
Professor Tubanjo.
Yeah. Prof, my old teacher from UI. Professor Tubanjo. Well done. Good afternoon.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Professor Woke, Professor Fawole, I greet you. Professor Fage Kamilu.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Enjoy your weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.